Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our second annual Smart Cities Canada Summit. Thank you for joining us today. We are joined by colleagues from around the world. Thanks to this incredible global Denton's platform, we have this opportunity to learn from one another in many spaces, including the Smart Cities space. I will be turning the screen or mic over to my partner, Clint Vince, shortly for the welcome remarks. But before I do, I have a few quick housekeeping matters to take you through. First, this session is being recorded and will be shared with you alongside any relevant materials next week. Questions can be submitted throughout the summit via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and our panelists will do their best to leave some time at the end of each session to answer your questions. Each session is registered for substantive credit with the Law Society of British Columbia and the Law Society of Ontario. The sessions may also be credited in your other relevant jurisdictions and by other professional associations. I'd encourage you to look into that. And please consult with the agenda you received for the accreditation for the sessions. Lastly, for those who may not know about our Denton Smart Cities podcast, I encourage you to check it out on the Denton's website, or even better, check it out on Spotify. Stacey helpfully dropped the link into our chat for those that want to click there. Or on Spotify, you can just type in Denton's Smart Cities chat and it comes up. I also encourage you to join us for our next event on November 3rd regarding ESG in the boardroom, a conversation with energy leaders. Clint will speak to this more, but importantly, if you are interested in smart cities and don't want to miss out on our events, please register with us and you will be added to the email distribution list. We will put that information in the chat as well. And now to get us started, it is my pleasure to welcome one of my favorite lawyers, Clint Vince. Clint is the chair of Denton's US Energy Practice and co-chair of Denton's Global Energy Sector. Clint is rated as one of the leading energy lawyers in the United States and has directed the expansion of the US energy team into a premier practice that includes professionals spanning the continent coast to coast, offering a full range of services to energy industry clients. He is widely recognized for his cutting-edge theories and solutions within the energy industry and has a top-tier litigation track record. Clint started the Smart Cities and Connected Communities think tank at Denton's, and he is one of the industry leaders on the subject. We are grateful to be able to learn from Clint as he has trailblazed in this industry. And welcome, Clint. Thank you for joining us from Washington. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kat. It's great to be with you and our dear friends, Chantal Bernier and Michael Leggett and Mary Bench. You are doing such a beautiful job with this Smart Cities program, and it is great to be with you again. Years ago, I argued a case before the US Supreme Court, and I received probably the best piece of advocacy advice I've ever received in my life. I was going up against a former Solicitor General who probably argued 65 cases up there. And I was in my 30s and a rookie. So I retained a deputy solicitor to give me some coaching. And he told me that I had to boil my entire case down to one sentence. And a wonderful piece of advice. And I've tried to use that and refine it going forward. If I were to look back on 2021 and 2020 and how it has impacted cities around the world, I would pick two words, and that is extremely volatile. And if I were to pick out one word for what is needed going forward, I would choose the word resilience. I think that is the key word for cities and the rest of the world for the next decade or two. Last year, when I spoke to this great gathering, I talked about the 4 C's of 2020. And sadly, those 4 C's have really even intensified in their damaging effect in 2021. And those 4 C's are COVID, and now the Delta variant of COVID, more than 240 million cases around the world, and nearly 5 million people have died. The only silver lining is the miraculous development of vaccines, and that hopefully will help stabilize the situation as we move forward. The second C is climate. And all eyes right now are on Glasgow, which is just unfolding in the next week. And we are concerned that cities and urban areas around the world are way behind on responding to challenges of climate, but we're sustained by the fact that there is at least momentum in a positive direction coming into to Glasgow. But we've seen, Kat and I were talking just before this webinar began, that this has certainly been a year of storms. And everywhere we look, there's been incredible turbulent weather. We've had an increased number of hurricanes and increased intensity of hurricanes and severe storms, which is to be expected as ocean temperatures rise. We've had devastating wildfires in the US and the West in particular, and severe drought in some locations, severe flooding in other locations, and extreme weather is also now pretty much the new norm. Examples, last summer in California, we had unexpected heat waves and rolling blackouts in a state that should have much better resiliency than that. The Texas winter storm, known as Uri, was devastating for that state. 4.5 million Texans were left in freezing weather for several days. More than 200 people died, and an entire energy market nearly collapsed. We also had Hurricane Ida just recently along the Gulf Coast, which took out most of the electric system in Louisiana and beyond. So we're having weekly and monthly examples of extreme weather and not enough adequate resilience at the moment to deal with it. The third C that we talked about last year is cyber. And we've also had an increasing number of serious incidents relating to cyber. we've had the Russian hacks now. In the US, we had the Colonial Pipeline shutdown, which was really a sobering example of cyber attack at scale, and how effective and devastating that can be. And so many of our cities now are getting hit with ransomware attacks and having the essential services shut down, sometimes for weeks at a time. The fourth C that we talked about is crisis, and economic and political crisis. What we've seen develop since the pandemic began, and I think it's a worldwide phenomenon, is what economists are now calling the K curve, where the top part of the K, affluent communities are doing pretty well, and affluent people within urban areas are doing pretty well. But the less affluent, low income and underserved members of the community are represented by the bottom portion of the K curve, which is just a downward cycle economically. And of course, we've had extreme political division, probably more than any of us are used to seeing in our lifetime. So against this really difficult, challenging, volatile background, we just see a really serious need to increase our resilience at every level. The medical infrastructure around the world, physical infrastructure. We know that the whole key for smart cities is to modernize infrastructure, and by modernizing infrastructure, that includes digital, physical, and social infrastructure. We know that social infrastructure has lagged. We talked about that last year, but we see some very, very promising developments that I'll get into in a moment. I think Kat mentioned it at the beginning of our discussion, and that is the entire social movement toward ESG, environmental, social governance types of issues, where we're going to see corporations and the rest of civil society focus on these issues in a way they haven't before. We, for half a century, we had Milton Friedman's advice that corporations should just focus on increasing their shareholder profits, and they did not need to worry so much about social and governance and environmental issues. Now we have a complete sea change coming in that area. We haven't yet felt the full impact on it. It's just getting started, but I think that it will have a profound positive effect. So it's one thing that makes me much more optimistic. I think it'll be truly a breakthrough. And I think also, well beyond corporations, it's an opportunity for smart cities to focus on these issues and improve the social infrastructure of our urban areas and communities. It's pretty well known. If we take a step back now and look at the world's population, more than half right now live in urban areas. We'll have an additional estimated 2.5 billion urban dwellers by 2050. In India alone, it's anticipated that their urban population will double by mid-century. And as we also know, 80% of our GDP is derived from cities, but 70% of our pollution, including greenhouse gases, comes from cities. As Andrew Steer, who is the CEO of the Bezos $10 billion Earth Fund, has said, the battle for a sustainable world will really be won or lost in our cities. And I totally agree with that. It's interesting that the World Resources Institute, which Andrew led just before he became head of the Bezos Fund, has just put out a groundbreaking report on cities. I would commend it to you. It's entitled The 7 Transformations for More Equitable and Sustainable Cities. And the 7 transformations include infrastructure design and delivery, service provision, data collection, urban employment, finance, land management, and governance. WRI worked on that report for the past 6 years. It's really worth taking a careful look at. What are some examples of positive smart city developments? First of all, cities have begun to really look at water-related issues. You're seeing a lot of smart water monitoring programs. In the US, for example, 1.7 trillion gallons of water are lost each year due to water leaks. And with improvements in technology, we're able to discover those leaks more quickly and begin to take remediation. We have smart electric grid development. We're hopeful that the infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure package in the United States will pass, which will put a lot of investment into grid modernization. But we've already got a good start on things like advanced metering infrastructure, some of the basics that are going to be needed going forward. We're seeing a lot of development for electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and that will be another sea change that will help in terms of ultimately reducing carbon emissions. We're seeing a lot of development on distributed energy resources, which is moving away from large central station power to behind the meter energy efficiency and conservation oriented measures, and things like rooftop solar and battery storage, those type of things. There's been development, not enough, but positive development in terms of seeking to make Wi-Fi more ubiquitous and getting access not just within cities, but also in rural communities. A lot of work on building improvement, not just in terms of energy efficiency, but touchless buildings now to deal with pandemic and health-related issues. A lot of movement analytics progress with respect to traffic, and also just social collection of data from residents in urban areas to cover things like where potholes are located or other infrastructure improvements that are needed in an urban area. So, and also a lot of development, as I've mentioned, on cleaner mobility, well-designed data analytics, and economic development opportunities. I know we're going to have to do a lot more work on protection of privacy. I know our partner Chantal Bernier is a leader in that field, and hopefully we'll hear more about that today. So to wrap up, I started our discussion with some sobering data and examples, then a little bit of optimism, but I would like to kind of leave you with an aspirational goal or two. I think we need to get massive investment into our infrastructure. And in order to do that, we're going to need to refine our finance mechanisms and other mechanisms for getting money fast into urban areas. If the war on sustainability really is going to be fought in our cities, we need to get moving in terms of getting a lot more financing and development than we have at the moment. Smart cities is all about modernizing infrastructure, and I mentioned digital, physical, and social infrastructure. The one thing that sustains me is that we have leaders like Kat and Chantal and Michael and Mary really moving forward with programs like the one today, and a lot of encouragement to get our civil society moving in a much greater orientation toward environmental and social governance. So I'll stop there, Kat. It's a pleasure to be with you, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, Clint. As always, you've hit so many, all of the relevant highlights, a lot of which we're going to get in during the program today. We'll get into the weeds and into the details. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us and get us started once again this year. It's always really refreshing to hear from you. And thank you for taking the time to join. A great first session to start in on a lot of these interesting subsets and areas in smart cities is our first session, which is regarding the Barcelona experience and drawing on how Barcelona has tackled smart cities successfully and a lot of these concepts. It is my pleasure to welcome our three speakers today, starting with Celia Gulo-Rabanal. Celia is head of the Administrative and Legal Support Office of the Barcelona Provincial Council and has been practicing law since 2004. She obtained her law degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, as well as a master's degree in tax law, a diploma in higher studies, specializing in public law, and a degree in local government law. She began her career specializing in tax law, but currently specializes in administrative law, local law, and management of protected natural areas. She is responsible for the management and coordination of the Administrative and Legal Support Office of the Natural Area Services Management of the Provincial Council. Thank you for joining us, Celia. We're very excited to hear from you. We also have Ignacio Vela joining us. Ignacio is the head of the TMT and privacy practice in Denton, Spain, based in Barcelona. He obtained a degree in law from the Universidad Complutense of Madrid and has a master's degree in telecommunications, internet and audiovisual law and business. As a lawyer, he has more than 15 years dedicated to technology and communications, and he has advised on innovative projects such as the Internet of Things or connected cars on a wide range of fields, including data, privacy, intellectual property, telecom regulation. Ignacio is also a professor in several business and law schools on matters such as cybersecurity, data protection, and digital business. Welcome, Ignacio, and thank you for joining. And last but never least, moderating the session is our colleague and partner, Chantal Bernier. Chantal leads the Denton's Canadian Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group. She is also a member of the firm's Government Affairs and Public Policy Group. Chantal advises leading edge national and international companies as they expand into Canada and Europe, enter the e-commerce space, adopt data analytics, and roll out data-based market initiatives. Her clients include ad tech companies, financial institutions, biotech companies, data analytics firms, and government institutions. Welcome all, and I'm turning the mic and the screen over to Chantal to get this session started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. Before I even go further, I would like to thank you and Clint for keeping Denton's at the forefront of the smart cities discourse. The fact is, cities are going smart, whether broadly, like Barcelona, that we're going to talk about in a moment, or partially, for example, Toronto, with a digitized platform for public transportation. The point is that this is the direction, meaning municipal services being digitized more and more. And I'm so grateful to you and to Clint to keep our firm really at the forefront of this movement, of this progress going forward. So as you said, today we're very lucky to have two colleagues who are really in the city that I have seen mentioned always as a model. And this is the genesis of this panel. When I was working as privacy counsel to Waterfront Toronto in the Sidewalk Labs Quayside project, my research was always taking me to the ideal smart city project, the one that had done it right. And it was always Barcelona. So I thought, well, we need to hear about this. So who better than Celia and Ignacio to walk us through that? So thank you so much for being with us. Before we go into the detail of the issues, you, Celia, are approaching the issue of smart cities from the public sector point of view. You, Ignacio, are approaching it from the private sector point of view. Can I ask you each, starting with Celia, to share with us what you see from your perspective, the value of a city going smart?
Okay, first, thank you for inviting me to this event. Well, it's clear that new technologies must allow for more successful present and futures. To achieve this, it's essential that citizens actively participate to indicate their region's needs and criteria. To make this potential innovation made possible by ICT easier, two main elements are required: people and resource. For the public sector, a new responsibility is generated: how to guarantee universal access to public rights and service. Public administration must prioritize the promotion of digital citizenship to correct the digital breach. This breach manifests itself in two main ways: structural breach, lack of access, equipment of sufficient digital capability. Here, factors such as age, education, income, gender have an impact. The situational breach, this becomes evident when connectivity becomes the basic infrastructure for work, education, or the relationship with the administration. For example, the role of the network in COVID-19 pandemic. The fight against the digital breach has been made as a priority in Spain, and it's mainly led by the Spanish government with the Digital Spain 2025 plan, the government of the Generalitat here in Catalonia with the shock plan against the digital breach and for the inclusion of digital empowerment of citizens, or the program of the city of Barcelona, Connectem Barcelona, as an example of the fight against the digital breach at the local level. All of these programs have sub-programs for gender, school, third sector, etc. The usefulness, accessibility, and ease of connectivity of the service offered by the administration and the constant expansion of the supply of programs and digital public service, they have to ensure that this reach all citizens. We cannot leave anyone behind. So I think that at this point, from the public sector, we have to join forces. In this section, the Provincial Council of Barcelona, where I work, focus part of its efforts through its plans and programs, as I will tell you later, especially if we take into account that the province of Barcelona has 311 municipalities, of which only about 151 are under 3,000 inhabitants. For these small municipalities, the challenge of implementing smart strategies is more difficult because they have scarce technical and economic resources. Precisely during the pandemic that we have suffered and that still affect our towns and cities, and the implementation of teleworking, it has been detected that a large part of the citizenship has preferred to move from big cities to small towns, where the virus could affect to a lesser extent. But if the purpose of a smart city is to achieve efficient management in all areas of the city, the goal must also be achieved by small municipalities, ensuring that all citizens have access to quality service, regardless of where they live.
Thank you. So Celia, I'm going to rip a page from Clint's notebook and try to summarize this in one word. What I hear, and I hope I hear you well, is that accessibility is the ultimate objective, equality and accessibility.
Yes.
Turning to Ignacio, from the private sector point of view, what's the value of a smart city?
Okay, well, hi all, and thank you for this opportunity. Okay, from a private sector point of view, a smart city projects offer many advantages. I think the first one is that they create a very good environment for innovation and research. Most of these projects are based on the use and the processing and intelligent use of data. So in this economy that is based on data, that is a very good advantage and a very safe environment for attract investment and to foster innovation. Also, there generate two kinds of opportunities from a private sector point of view. It allows new type of companies to help in the management of city services or digital companies that are not considered like the traditional companies that will take care of waste management, have an opportunity to be part of that service. So they open a whole new market for them. And that's also very good for the economy. And also it has the fact that traditional companies, waste management or water supply companies, that they did not digitalize their process or their way of doing business. Now they've been forced due to the competition to do that. And that's good for not only for improve the, Celia was saying, the efficiency of the municipality services, but also to improve and modernize the economy, which in the case of Spain is something that much needed. So a smart city project has many, many advantages. And to be honest, I think smart cities are the next step for cities is the best and probably the only way to gain knowledge on the complexity and the dynamics of a city, and it's a way to support decision making. So it creates a more efficient allocation of resources, which in turn benefits citizens, when in turn benefits the whole society. So from a private sector, I think it's a good place to public and private cooperation, and that's what we are looking forward.
Well, doing the same thing as I did with Celia, what I hear from you is economic opportunity through innovation. This obviously pushes innovation in the private sector to meet the goals of the smart city. So let me stay with you, Ignacio, to share with you the issues that most highly came up in the smart city attempt, we'll call it that way, in Toronto through the Waterfront Toronto Sidewalk Labs project in the Quayside. So 3 main issues I think we can say came up. The first one was data sovereignty, meaning the concern of citizens that a US company was going to collect big data on Canadians and export it to the United States. The second big issue was the risk of surveillance, meaning that all of these digital solutions, which were obviously highly predicated upon personal information, whether it was sensors, whether it was credit card, registration to access services, and so on and so forth, and the creation, therefore, of a risk of state surveillance as well as capitalist surveillance. So that was the second issue, was surveillance. And the third one was intellectual property, meaning that this American company was going to essentially develop technologies with the intellectual property attached to it that it would monopolize, keep it to itself. So I'd like to hear you on those 3 issues. How did they play out in Barcelona? Let's start with data sovereignty. Did data sovereignty issues arise at all in Barcelona?
Okay, data sovereignty is an issue in Europe everywhere you go, and we have the competition not only but US companies but also for China companies. So it's something that is on the discussion, and I know there's a discussion on the digital agenda at European and also the Spanish level. But the approach in Barcelona, they do not have a specific concern regarding if the data is going to be sent to another state, Canada, US, or China. They have a different approach with this data sovereignty in terms that the data belongs to the persons or to the citizens, and the data should be used for what they call the public good. So it means like they have to give back control to persons over the data. They have kind of smart city project in Barcelona started, I think, more than a decade ago, so they have come a long way since then, and they have kind of reversed the approach. The 16 smart city projects was like large volume of data collected by city councils or by territories, and they use the data try to certain problems and solutions. Now, what Barcelona is trying to implement is a data for the people approach, where citizens drive the process of choosing which problems need to be solved. And I put you an example. For example, there's certain areas in Barcelona where noise is a main concern. We are Spanish, we make a lot of noise, and specific, depending on the area, that noise has a more impact on the neighborhood. So citizens kind of created their own noise sensors to collect data and go to the municipality saying, we have this level of data that is not good for health purposes. You should start a project in order to do that. So there's a kind of a reversing the way that the smart cities is approached, and the owner of the data should be the specific person or the people and not companies. This, the good thing or the bad thing, depending on your view, is that this is aligned with GDPR. With GDPR, there's no ownership of data. Data should be processed for a specific purpose, for a purpose limitation, only stored for a certain specific period of time. So they are trying to take that regulation to the next level and try to use that. They have also, as I think Celia was also explaining, a lot of programs regarding digital education and digital skills. So it's more applying the GDPR in a smart way or in a way that is innovative rather than inventing or creating something new. And with regards to intellectual property, in Spain, we have we have like 3 different ways to protect intellectual property, which is intellectual property regulation as such, which covers audiovisual works, but for example, for smart cities, it will also covers maps and photographies. We also have patent regulation. Patent regulation kind of covers invention that have industrial applications. And finally, we have trade secrets regulation. Trade secret regulations, it has, in my opinion, is one, has been recently approved. I think the regulation is from 2 years ago. So the practical implications are still to be evaluated. But the main thing with trade secret is that it can protect any information, regardless if it's original or not, provided that it's secret, that it has commercial value, and it has been protected. This does not happen the same with intellectual property. That has to have certain creative level, has to be original, has some limits in the way you have to exploit it, and patents, you have to be registered, you have to go through a lengthy process in order to take protection. So you have those regulations, and you need to choose which one you are going to use in order to obtain protection. Because if you're a private company and you go to a smart city project, you have 2 concerns. First, if Spain is a jurisdiction that is secure in order to protect your own IP rights, which the answer to that is yes. We are part of the Berne Convention and the Paris Convention, so we guarantee to foreign nationals the same rights in order to protect their IP that to domestic nationals. And how to secure the rights of the IP you have generated in that particular territory. And in that case, you need to negotiate, of course. Then later on, I will give some recommendations on how to do that. But in the case of Barcelona, for example, we have an open data with all the data sets, more than 500 data sets generated of the sensors of the city that are free to use. And they have a license for those open data sets, which is, it depends on the data set, but the license by default is a Creative Commons license, an attribution Creative Commons license, which is quite open. So you can do almost anything with those data sets, but you cannot impose restrictions. So there are many things to consider with coming with intellectual property. And just to finalize regarding the surveillance in Spain is heavily regulated. We have a directive that was implemented, I think, a few years ago regarding of the use of data in order to prevention of crime and security. So there are 2 ways to regulate it. First, abide by that law, which police and security forces, we assume that they are abiding by this law. And secondly, installing privacy by default and by design mechanisms. That means that the data, for example, used in video surveillance or on sensors should only gather data that is necessary for the purpose that you want to achieve, not just given to police or to a judge unless a judge requested by a court order. But you have measures in order to implement that, and you can start by technology and then by regulation. So Barcelona is trying to do that and try to implement those data privacy principles, privacy by design and privacy by default principles since the very start. So I think that's good news.
So there are solutions.
Yeah.
That being said, listening to you, I hear that you had a very robust regulatory framework to draw upon. So this is something we need to put on our billboard for Canada. Do we have the regulatory framework that truly would support our objectives in a
and
smart
also
city?
you have to consider that even Barcelona Smart City project, even is as big as it is, and there's a lot of innovation here, they have also to abide by the law. So they cannot assign intellectual property, or they cannot create intellectual property in a way that is different, or they have to respect privacy regulations, and they have the intention to do that. So first, if you are going to involve in this project, check the jurisdiction and the principles that are applying, and then move on or make a business decision whether it's interesting to invest in that project or not.
So Celia, listening to Ignacio, I understand why the Provincial Council is looking at actually supporting more cities going smart. Before we go even into that, can you please describe to us what the Provincial Council's mandate is?
Okay, the Provincial Council, as the as the governing body of the province, as defined in our constitution, basically provides technical, economic, and legal support to the municipalities so that they can provide quality local service in most homogeneous manner to all the territory. It coordinates municipal service and organizes supramunicipal public service. The provincial councils, together with the city councils, are the closest administration and the most familiar with the territorial realities and the needs of the people. It has been demonstrated that the design and management of service from the proximity can be more appropriate and efficient. This benefits people well-being. Our work model pivots on the local government network plan, a plan that, from the respect for the local autonomy, is articulated into networking between local governments and the provincial council to build a joint action program according to the criteria of efficiency and economy of public action. The local government network plan is based on three basic pillars. The first one, the General Investment Program, is an economic support program designed to promote new investment and the preservation and replacement of sustainable investment based on economic endowment guaranteed to each local entity in the province of Barcelona. The distribution of this endowment is based on a distribution formula which ensures territorial balance, objectivity, equity, fairness, and transparency, which is accessible and can be consulted on our website. This program has two subside lines, the line 1, which supports sustainable projects, and the line 2, which are unconditional investment fund. The second pillar is the catalog of service, which covers the offer of technical, material, economic, or direct support that the Barcelona Province Council make available to the municipal governments of the province for the provision of local service and activities. The catalog of service contains a global offer of 362 support resources for local governments. The catalog resources are adapted to the needs of the territory and are integrally aligned with the strategies of Barcelona Province Council, the action plan and budget of the 2019 and 2023 mandate, fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, and Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. The catalog includes 164 technical support resources, 114 economic support resources, and 84 material support resources, which aim to reinforce local autonomy, boost economic and social reactivation, and build fair and more sustainable towns and cities. The third and last pillar are the specific programs, which are called and lines of support designed for specific target groups, goals, or circumstance or emergencies that are not covered by the two previous instruments.
Okay, so clearly there's an economic support objective. Where does smart city model fit in? What are you trying to achieve in supporting other cities going smart?
Okay, and in 2014, the Barcelona Provincial Council approved the Sustainable Development Strategy Model. It defined objectives and lines of action in areas such as mobility, energy, efficiency, and fight against climate change. Likewise, services were already being provided historical that allow many municipalities to be present on internet, electronic communication, and management in the file of accounting or the register of inhabitants. The experience and positive assessment of this service raise the possibility and needs to expand them. It is from that year that it becomes aware of the need to take a step forward and evolve toward a smart strategy, incorporating the strategy of sustainable development. From this willingness to cooperate and the exercise of this role to ensure equity within the territory of the province, the Provincial Council promote a framework of relation between cities and towns based on the basis of the principle of collaborating, efficiency, sustainability, and participation. It is indeed that the province of Barcelona is not a sum of smart cities, but that the territory becomes a smart region. I want to draw attention to this point. Our ambition, all our means to facilitate this transition, but with the aim of achieving the smart region. The Barcelona Province Council has become a benchmark for municipality in design and implementation of initiatives in the field of smart city, smart region. Our will was and is to be a dynamic agent of the municipalities of territory and offer them resources. With this, we have 6 strategic objectives. Support local corporations to facilitate the implementation of a smart solution in different areas, like public services, mobility, citizen participation, education, culture, tourism, and economic promotion. Provide tools to municipalities in the form of service and application common to the whole territory to respond to the needs of information management and provide joint solution to the challenge that, from a technological perspective, it is appropriate to deal with globally. Facilitate the participation in national and international projects for the development of a smart solution for municipalities, to generate spaces for knowledge exchange and training among the municipalities participating in smart initiatives, divulge the successful experience carried out in the territory, and promote the publication of open data and the development of application and service based on them. This is what we want,
Right.
our objective to be the province of Barcelona and smart regions.
So using your term, smart city migration, what are the main challenges that you see?
Well, from the Barcelona Provincial Council, one of, I think, of important resource is the technical assistant is offered to municipality a diagnosis of a smart city solution applied to urban management. In here we have 2 lines of support, the definition and development of smart city strategies and the design of a smart city solution for specific municipal management areas. Okay. With this assistance, we want municipalities to develop smart city strategies, giving them tools to allow them to complete and coordinate innovation strategies, improving the quality and efficiency of service to citizens. Knowing the challenge that need to be addressed or in which areas there are the best places is relevant when making decisions. The main areas in which smart cities have been identified as having the most potential are mobility, energy, waste management, housing, water, and the environment. Smart city strategies should serve to improve management in these areas with the help of information and communication technologies, and the result of these actions should lead to an improvement in the quality of life of citizens. Based on all the data, and once the strong and weak points have been defined, the different services should be measured and the basis of the smart access, the 6 lines, and on the degree of compliance with which the level of maturity of a smart city is measured, such as quality of life, citizenship, environment, mobility, economic, and government. The strategies must therefore be planned, programmed, and defined by analyzing the state and degree of maturity of each town and city to detect in which areas to work and thus involve toward a smart city. From my point of view, this is the best strategy the city should face to develop a smart city. Analyze, plan, and define basis on the resource, collaborate with the private sector to achieve their objective, as use existing model, adapting them if necessary to their needs.
Thank you. So one last question before we move back to Ignacio. One of the big challenges we encountered in the Waterfront Toronto Sidewalk Labs Quayside project was citizens' engagement. So as a public agency, how do you see citizens' engagement around a smart city project? What's the best way to achieve what you called digital citizenry a moment ago, citizens' engagement around the project. Did you hear the question, Celia?
Sorry?
Did you hear the question?
No.
So my last question to you was, how does a city achieve citizens' engagement towards a smart city project? When a smart city, when a city chooses to go smart, you have to engage citizens. How is that achieved? How have you seen it achieved? How are the cities you support towards smart city migration address getting citizens to agree to support the project?
Well, we have we normally we use the process of citizen participation that is regulation by a law. So in most of the projects that we want to start, then we make this process, you know. This is not one of my specialty, you know, because we have people that we hire for this special process, you know, because they make a lot of, they study a little town or a city. They study the different, you know, neighbors association, cultural association, sports association, and they start a work of different sessions, you know, to know working with normal these groups or this enterprise have a psychologist, you know, that they make a meeting and they explain what do you think about that, or what do you think this is the best or not. And after all this procedure, you know, they give you the results. So when to the Diputación, if we have contract them, or to the city council, you know, and after all this procedure, then you have more or less, you know, if this project is going to be accepted or not. And what other thing we have is that a lot of projects on the public procurement, it's all publicized in the public, you know, like in a public diaries, and you have time from the publication, or perhaps 15 days or 30 days to make allegations to the projects.
Okay, so what I understand is, number one, it's critical to identify the specific stakeholders, the specific interests of the various communities, and really bringing them into the conversation. Thank you for that. So now I'd like to go back to Ignacio. As an IT lawyer and privacy lawyer in this smart city that is really stated as a model, can you tell us what are the main legal issues that you would identify for a city that chooses to go in that direction?
Yeah, I think they were discussed before, but the main legal issues I have faced, of the main concerns when you are negotiating with city council, is privacy and intellectual property. So the way to address them, or my experience, the one that has been more successful, is you have to first understand what is the concern of the city council about those issues. If you take to privacy, I remember a meeting with the city council, or civil servants of the city council, that were very adamant, stating that they want all the intellectual property, and they say providers come and go, but city council stays forever. So we need to preserve the use of these IP rights in case we need them in the future. So once you understand the concern, you can provide solutions to them. So it's fair for them in order to obtain the IP, in order to use that particular data set or whatever service you're providing. But then you have to explain your terms as a private company in terms of, okay, I can give you this, but it should not be exclusive, or I want a license back for the work results, stuff like that. Also, it's very useful in terms of IP to be very honest of what deliverables the city council or the territory should be expecting. For example, a contract with a telecom operator, they wanted to include a clause regarding that she provide all the data generated in that contract to the city council, which is fine. But the thing is, what that data should look like. It's a report every month. It's a report every 3 months. You own the intellectual property of the data, but the know-how in order to obtain that data could be within the company. The company should obtain a license back in order to use that knowledge for future projects, stuff like that, and have an honest conversation about them about that. That's very useful. Then you will enter into the conversation of how to regulate that and how to do that based on the intellectual property regulation. And as for intellectual property, for privacy, of course, is always a big concern. My recommendation here is that regulation includes, the GDPR includes privacy by design, privacy by default tools, and also includes a data protection impact assessment. Those are very useful tools that you could implement as a provider. So if you go to the city council saying, okay, we have these tools, these surveillance cameras or sensors, and we have carried out this data protection impact assessment stating what they do and what are the measures that we are going to implement in order to not be invasive of privacy, you give the sense to the city council that they are hiring a provider that takes care of privacy and that is compliance with general data protection regulation. That is useful, and you could do that beforehand. So, and it's not that expensive, and it creates a good starting point for negotiations.
So, would it be fair to summarize your observations as to privacy being absolutely at the center of the legal challenges and intellectual property equally at the center? Is it fair to understand you to mean that those are the two salient legal issues around a smart city?
Yeah, they are, since they involve negotiations. Also, any public service that needs to be abide by contract for public procurement. That is a different discussion, and that's something that you cannot abide, and you have to comply with it, and that's it, not further discussion. But those issues can create a discussion, and you can have a competitive advantage if you are well prepared.
Thank you. So we only have 3 minutes left, but I'd like to hear you on 10 years later. So Barcelona has actually been launched as a smart city project in 2011. 10 years later, tell me, Ignacio, what would you say is the verdict on this, well, let's call it an experiment, but it's really becoming now.
It's indeed an experiment at some point,
Yeah.
so, and that's fine because it's the way
okay.
we live it. So I think we have a more open city. I think we have a city that the decision making is more based on data, but we also have a city that decisions can be challenged based on data because the data is available to everyone. So that creates an interaction with citizens and city council authorities that I think is very useful. And also, I read an article on the Smart City project at Barcelona saying that it's always evolving. So you cannot just say, okay, we have reached the Smart City status and we cannot move from there. No, there's going to be something new. The dynamics of a city and the needs of a city are going to be growing in the next years, and there's always challenges. So the thing is that you have to keep on track and you have to keep innovating and experimenting. So that's the main challenge, and I think the results are going to be good if we continue that way.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Really, both of you have confirmed, I think, the impression many of us had that actually Barcelona is a success story, so much so that the Provincial Council is actually seeking to replicate the Barcelona experience
Yes.
outside. And so thank you so much for being resource persons. I think particularly you, Ignacio, if we want to reach out to you on, okay, how do we figure this out in Canada, taking advantage of the experience in Spain, we really do see that there is an example where the legal issues that do arise intrinsically in relation to a smart city have found a solution in Barcelona. The other thing that strikes me that I want to underline is what you've just said, that it's an evolving process. Because the technology constantly evolves, well, the legal issues constantly evolve as well. Every time you have a new technology at the service of digitization of municipal services, the issue of privacy will come up again. The issue of intellectual property will come up again, right? So
Yeah, and artificial intelligence will be the next main challenge for smart cities.
yeah, but it is also what's so exciting. That's the way to progress, is addressing and overcoming all of these challenges. So we are at time. It is now 10:03. So I want to thank you so much for having taken the time to give us your practical experience around a real smart city that is one of the most mature, extremely helpful to us. And with that, I'm giving it back to Kat to continue this conversation. So thank you, Celia. Thank you, Ignacio.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
to
very much.
all three of you, Ignacio, Celia, and Chantal, for that very interesting and educational story overview of the Barcelona success experience. And now we are going to hear about another international success story from two of our panelists, and I see they've both joined. So thank you, Tim Trinca and Pietro Doran, for joining us today. Tim and Pietro were intricately involved in the Songdo International Business District in South Korea. And we've named this session Relentless Execution. I will let the two of them tell you why. I will, though, before I hand things over to Tim to introduce Pietro, briefly provide an overview and an introduction of Tim. So Tim Trinca is a senior attorney and head of the real estate practice. He has worked as foreign lawyer in Seoul for over 30 years. He joins us today from South Korea. Throughout his career, Tim has been engaged in a wide variety of corporate, commercial, and financial transactions in Asia, Europe, and the United States. Tim's practice focuses on the construction, financing, development, acquisition, disposition, and leasing of real property in Korea. And in recent years, the acquisition of real property in Europe and the United States on behalf of Korean institutional investors. Tim also has substantial experience in joint ventures and distribution arrangements, including franchising and technology licensing. Tim's work was essential in the Songdo IBD, and he will speak with us today about that experience with his long-time friend and colleague, Pietro. It wouldn't be a Smart Cities Summit, as I was saying earlier, without the tech issues Celia was having on and off, and a storm on the horizon. But we've got it in hand now, and over to you, Tim and Pietro, to get us started on the Songdo International Business District session. Welcome and thank you.
That's
Thank
great.
you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Kat. Pietro, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Pietro Doran. I been a colleague and friend of Tim's for, what is that, about 120 years now, Tim?
Yeah.
We both really cut our teeth in Korea on large scale urban development. I started Korea's first real estate services practice, real estate services, global services, back in '94. Built that to about 15 people, sold that to Morgan Stanley, and ended up running Morgan Stanley's distressed debt management in Korea. Went on to a project called New Songdo City when it was a black hole of an idea, to managing that as its CEO on the ground for the next 5-6 years, and as a principal within the project. Went on to private equity in Asia, raised capital, so it was Korea's first private equity, real estate private equity group that was homegrown, and even though it had a face like mine. And now I'm doing similar things in a place called Atlanta, Georgia. And that's a very quick synopsis.
Right, just a brief word on the backgrounds of both my screen and Pietro's screen. My background is what New Songdo City looks like today. I think this picture was taken just about a month ago, and it represents only about a third of the size of the project. And Pietro's background is the first rendering of the title of the project is called Forge Atlanta. Pietro, you want to move your head a little bit there so people can look at this? That's the first rendering on 10 acres right in the smack in the middle of downtown Atlanta. So before we start, Pietro, can you quickly summarize and compare the development programs of Songdo and now Forge Atlanta?
Wow, yeah, they're two very different projects, and yet there's a lot of commonality. Songdo was built to be a major urban center, a center of commercial activity, a brand new city coming literally out of the ground. It was a private-public partnership. It was actually a second try when we got involved in it. You might remember, Tim, it was called Media City originally, and ran into the financial crisis, and there was very little understanding they had an idea to try to create a Silicon Valley in Korea, but very little knowledge about actually how that gets done. And that sort of got mixed up with urban development programming and a lot of intergovernmental competition. And that just never got off the ground. What they had done is already started all of the land reclamation, because, as I say, Songdo literally grew out of the sea. That, as I say, was and I say a public-private initiative. The government, of course, had sponsored tax incentives. They basically paid for all of the infrastructure, the major infrastructure under the city, the streets, all of the information infrastructure, technology. Our job as Gale International was to master plan that city and then manage its development and integrate it into those visions that the government had. And try to make this a successful initiative through, as I say, really one of the first privately developed cities on top of a government-sponsored infrastructure. The difference with Atlanta is that it is a purely private initiative. It's not 1,600 acres that is which is what Songdo is built on. It's 10 acres. However, Songdo was built out in the middle of nowhere. It was, as you remember, Tim, it was an isolated area with no connectivity.
Well, it was mostly water.
Yeah, it was. Well, that was one of the big challenges. It was water, and it was completely land reclamation based on Dutch technology. Forge Atlanta, which will be about a 4 million square foot development, is built on a site that was actually the origination point for the city of Atlanta, that through urban development policies in the 60s, saw this area, which was once vibrant, full of high rises, full of activity. It was the economic hub of Atlanta, slowly sink down under a sea of asphalt, disappear from memory, as development went north with the introduction of the super highways that connected the whole Northeast. And they just basically plowed through cities and neighborhoods and whatever to build those arteries. And so traffic and cars became the way of transportation, whereas Atlanta used to be the hub of where all train transportation met. So it buried it into, it became a sea of parking lots. Our area was an industrial area site. It was a cold storage, and the city moved north. So that we ended up acquiring on a purely private initiative, these 10 acres, which we are planning to actually be on a second phase, as much as up to 17 acres of a brand new city complex, a district within the city of Atlanta, from the ground up. That's the commonality, ground up.
Right. Pietro, did you have a slide of the master plans of Songdo and the master plan of Forge?
So that's the master plan for the original done by Cohen, Pedersen, Fox. As I say, that was about, I believe it was 20 million square feet of office building. It's 30 million of residential. I think it's something around 10, 13 million of a retail, conferencing centers, all of that. So a real city, and that's an 18-hole Jack Nicklaus golf course over to the west. That was the original master plan, Tim, for New Songdo City. And you'll notice the master plan, the Central Park, which was roughly similar in scale to that in New York.
Well, and it's a good point. What was so unique about the KPF master plan is that they went around the world and picked elements of great cities. They picked the canals of Venezia. They picked the city gardens of Savannah, Georgia. And there were elements of all of these cities around the world that just fit into the plan, and that's what resulted. And it's just an incredible plan.
Well, it was a good base to start from. 40% of that city is open space.
Right.
So it's also an emerald necklace. It's all the parks are all interconnected, so you can literally walk through the whole city through a park.
So Pietro, let's jump to the financing a little bit. We all know that the first financing in any project is absolutely the hardest, and Songdo was no exception to that. And under the land supply agreement between the project and the city of Incheon, there was a clause indicating that a certain portion of the investment in Songdo had to be foreign. How did you deal with that?
Well, I think this is always a big part of every discussion when you start to talk about a new city, smart city. Smart city, of course, has several permutations and definitions. It can be applied to an existing infrastructure where you try to upgrade that infrastructure and repurpose buildings and all of that sort of thing. A smart city can be planned from the ground up, where technology becomes part of its DNA. A smart city can be a public-private initiative, or it can be a privately developed initiative. They all have extremely different characteristics and needs. Public-private tends to infer that there's certain funding available, again, for infrastructure and that sort of thing. Purely private means you're out there trying to finance the whole thing. And the challenge with this particular project, and I think it's just so important to always come back to the realities of economics. Does technology cost more? Does it increase the price of buildings? Banks generally are not driven by the great visions of smart city technologies. They're driven by short-term, how can you pay us back if you borrow the money? What's your business model? How does that work? And that was no different with Songdo. The government's mandate was it had to have foreign investment in it. B, it had to be privately financed with no guarantees from the government. And this was just a huge challenge because frankly, not many people knew where Incheon was in the first place. They would always ask you about Seoul. Is it next to Seoul? Number two, how far away from North Korea is it? These are considerations a lot of cities don't have, that there's an adversary right on your border, although I think the Europeans have a better, especially Germany and whatnot, have some experience in
No,
that.
and Pietro, if I might interrupt, I mean, you would go on these road shows around the world trying to raise capital.
Oh,
And you
yeah.
kept telling me that what the question that got asked the most in presenting this project to capital was, you want to do what? Where?
Yeah, you want,
you're within artillery range of North Korea. You've got a missile base right next door to the site, and so that's another, the obstacles. And so you put up this slide, the Big Bang financing universe of New Songdo City. Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, one of the things I needed to do, first of all, was to explain to us a group of bureaucrats in Incheon, how do you approach the building of a new city? And I had to explain how our program would work in terms of the use of capital, the mix of capital, the stories that would need to go behind that that capital to convince them about the risk, the pricing of that capital. Bringing in foreign investment into a foreign location, it creates its own challenges. Lack of familiarity, lack of knowledge of law, which is where a guy like you comes in handy, Tim. There's just this enormity of complexity that goes into creating something called a capital structure that will drive all of this. On top of that, you're trying to convince and talk to people that you want to create something called, and there really wasn't the term smart city at this time, it was ubiquitous city, which means ubiquitous technology that would permeate and become part of the DNA of a place. And so basically we had to in as compact a way as possible, explain how does capital function? How does it drive a process that allows you to create something extraordinary? And I see here, I came up with an idea of inflation theory, where at the very beginning you have a black hole. It's just a concept. The top of that graph is the process, the planning process. Is the lower part of this is all about how the capital then starts to, and planning and government cooperation and partnership starts to pull together to create the process of construction and development and actually things coming out of the ground. And this is what I call the Big Bang theory. I actually drew the first one in 2002, and then you go from black hole of idea, magnitudes of activity that really are driven by capital and the complexity of the capital mix that finally explodes into the galaxies of separate initiatives, separately owned parcels, all of them with their own capital structures, all of them with their own joint ventures, all of them with whether they're different profiles of hotels, of residential, of schools. All of these have extremely different capital profiles. It's like looking at light spectrum and saying, are you on the red of it or on the blue of it? Theme parks, hotels, these are driven by different capital models, investment models. And that's the process of building a city. You're doing an orchestration. You don't want it to be a cacophony. You want it to be a melody. And so somehow through all of this, you have to have an absolute idea of where you want to end up and have a real sense of the scale in which you are now, and you are launching off. And you have to be able to convince people that this is possible and doable. And the only way you do that is show that in a graphic, that if you can draw it, you can do it.
Right. Pietro, how does that financing experience contrast with or resemble your experience that you're going through right now with Forge Atlanta?
Because this is a purely private initiative. Now, the challenge when we started Songdo was, of course, there really wasn't any smart cities anywhere in the world at the time, and no one really understood what that meant. I think when you talked about it, they all thought of, Blade Runner or something like that. It just sounded like very conceptual. The difference today is that technology is well understood. As we've heard from other speakers, people all over the world are talking about smart cities and IoT, and now we all understand what artificial intelligence is. We all understand concepts like metaverse. There's such a broader, deeper understanding for what this all means: the interconnectivity, sustainability, how technology can help enhance, how some of the challenges of technology in trying to create solutions creates its own problems and challenges. But back then, there wasn't any real idea what this meant. And I'm not sure even the Koreans actually understood what it meant. They had a general idea. They wanted to create one of the most advanced platforms, urban platforms for economic development that would allow Korea to be able to claim its place and also be able to showcase its own technologies for enhancing lifestyle, livability, and economy. Now, we go to, but again, this was an island. This was in the middle of nowhere. You didn't have communities and stakeholders. What we did have as a stakeholder was military, because as you say, we had a missile base right across that would have gone through 10 of the buildings if there was ever an issue with North Korea. You got to remember, Korea is one of the major component countries of the Yellow Sea. Around the Yellow Sea is Japan, Korea, China, and even Russia and North Korea. And this is a volatile place. Very few people understand the Yellow Sea as being sort of Asia's equivalent of the Mediterranean. The Japanese as being the sort of the Persians, and the Chinese as the Egyptians, and the Koreans as the Greeks. So you got this historical, cultural issues that you just don't have to deal with so much in Atlanta. Atlanta is an urban infill project. It is in the city. It is a forgotten part of the city and has been that way. But it provides a tremendous opportunity, simply because for the last 40 years, it is basically this area of South Downtown has, was basically buried under concrete and forgotten about. However, there is a light rail station right to the east boundary. Is that the east? Yeah, the east boundary of the site. There's tremendous connectivity to downtown. And right next door to us is three of the largest government complexes. You got City Hall, you've got the state capitol, and you got Fulton County, which is the largest county, I believe, in Atlanta or Georgia. They're right next door. So very different. Atlanta is an urban infill, whereas Songdo was purely from an isolated location on the edge of 26 million people.
Right. Hey, Pietro, we should move on. You've often talked about momentums in a project. What were the momentums like in Songdo, and did they change over time? Talk a little bit about what you and I've talked about over the years: self-interest versus mutual interest,
Sure.
as well as movement.
This is where I came up with relating to Korea. The two hardest things to do in Korea is move the rock, stop the rock. I learned a lesson in trying to converge interests into something called mutual interest of central government, interests of local government, interests of stakeholders, interests of those that we would need to participate in this project. Korean corporations, Korean development companies, all of that. And what you found is in trying to just manage mutual, you often ended up with dispute, conflict, and anything but mutual. You ended up with endless debate. Now, what I found was if you could go to understand the self-interest of each of these parties, and I don't mean to sound cynical because there's nothing cynical about this. If you could understand what the needs of those individual components would be, those stakeholders, then you had a much stronger ability to create a momentum where if they saw how their interests could be best served by being into this project, it was much more difficult for them to then, as you align that self-interest, you basically created a kinetic energy. It became a momentum. It became a consensus. And consensus is very powerful. It's not particularly mutual. It's a consensus that it serves our interest to be part of this. That creates momentums of inevitability where eventually you cross that threshold and you start to see things coming out of the ground. And that's relentless execution, which is the name of this, is because you must be relentless about guiding that self-interest, about overcoming barriers. You don't start something like this unless you're willing to cross that event horizon and say to yourself, this is going to be my life for the next 10 years, and I'm going to do everything possible to make this thing happen.
Right, Pietro, and that kind of leads into the next question. Can you talk a little bit about, with the momentums and doing this kind of project and having it actually be successful, and it is built and it's operating, and there's what, a couple of 100,000 people live there now. Can you talk about lessons learned from Songdo, a 1,600 acre, $30 billion project, and how those lessons are now being applied to your new project in Atlanta, as you said, a downtown project over 10 acres for approximately $3 billion.
Well, all of these projects start with, I would say, a visionary. I wasn't the visionary. I was one of those who joined that visionary, who was approached by City of Incheon, a private developer in the US, a guy named Stan Gale, who had really never developed anything of this scale before, but had the courage and the vision to see what this could be. So in Atlanta, we have a guy named Jay Kim, who also saw the possibilities of where Atlanta was going. Is it's rapidly turning into one of the alternatives to a Silicon Valley. The demographics are just driving corporate America into the southeast region of the United States, with Atlanta being a real hub of that. And we've got everybody moving in, Microsoft and everyone. But 3 or 4 years ago, that was still an evolving process. And this young guy, Korean American out of Atlanta, said, well, why can't we create a platform where it's built for that technology right from the ground up? And so I would say that it's really important that there's always that vision behind these things. So where was that question going, Tim? I got a little bit lost.
Yeah, no, it's just lessons learned from that.
So I'll go with the lessons learned. These projects that take years to do, and with new concepts that have not been tried, communication is just how you communicate it, how you keep people motivated. What did we run into with Songdo as this brand new business economic center that would be built on a grid of technology? Not everybody understood what that even meant. Number two, if you lived in Busan, which was far away from Songdo, you didn't care. You wondered, why do my tax dollars have to go into that? You had mayors being elected as we went through the process. not everybody gets excited about these things. Everybody's wondering what their interest, how is that being served by this project? A national project, is that good enough? Is it patriotic? But you have change constantly. Technology changes constantly. What's brand new when you start is 10 years old, and in technology, that's another epic. That technology 10 years ago is not particularly applicable to where technology is today. So it needs to evolve. You have to plan for the evolution of technology as you build things. You can't just apply technology as an application on top of, say, when you do existing buildings and call that smart. Smart means it evolves. Smart means it's constantly monitoring itself. But what we found with Songdo is technologies get old, and you have to build to evolve.
Right, and so going back to Songdo, focusing a bit more on technology here. I mean, the project started in 2003, and again, as you said, was the first smart city in the world. Can you talk about how, in fact, Songdo back then was and still is smart, and things that the planners did right, and what do you think they made a misstep on? I don't want to call it wrong, but in planning this urban area.
Well, and you're right. You can't say wrong. I mean, it's because it was one of the first to be truly thought of from the very beginning, where the planning was, we're going to make this the most technologically advanced city. They didn't call it smart then. The most technologically advanced urban complex on the planet. So that was right. What was wrong was the focus on technology as opposed to people. The idea that if you applied enough technology to something, it would be good for everybody. And then to find that most people moving in didn't really understand how that technology affected them. Technology is something that's ubiquitous, that you don't even feel. The most successful technology is the one you're not even aware is there. It just is making your life easier. And by living in this place, you realize everything's easier than when you go to Seoul or you go to an older urban area, and everything is so much more difficult to do. The telecommunications are slower. Your ability to have effective Zoom conferences is affected by the speed of your communications. So it's at 3G, it was 5G. Remember when we started Songdo, it was 2G. So I would say that probably if I were to look back and say, where was the weighting of priority? Maybe not well understood. And that is, you can't just simply apply technology. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand what it is you're trying to build, and how do you apply technology to enhance that, to make that more successful, to make it more sustainable, all of those. And I think that was always the challenge with Songdo, is that focus on just of introducing mass technology as though that in itself was the solution that would solve all problems. And I think that was always a bit of a disconnect, where the other challenge is it's a private initiative. So not every building owner is going to share the vision of that centrally planned location. So what you end up with is a centrally planned location that's technologically, enhanced and developed and cutting edge, and yet you have development parcels owned by private individuals who are not motivated to be interconnected with that. And you have to figure out ways to keep them motivated in being part of this experiment, this platform, this new urban platform. it doesn't always work. And when you've got different mayors coming in, how many mayors did we go through?
I think at least 4.
Yeah, 4. Each one with its own priorities and not wanting to have the other guy look good. So what would they do? Stop the project, review it. They would want to add their piece to it. So politics is something you can never get away with, no matter how great your vision is. The priorities of politics and economics.
Hey, Pietro, we're sort of bumping up and nearing our end. It just very quickly, could you just explain how one might define what is success in terms of
somebody asked me that, when would you think Songdo is successful? And you put me, I remember this. I said, I thought about it. When is it successful? I mean, you know when a mall is successful, you know when an office building is successful, but how do you know when a city is successful? What does that mean? Well, today, I guess we could look at Songdo, for example, and see there's 5 universities there now. There's a huge technology complex there. There's 170,000 people living in this place now. But is it really successful? Is it a place? Does it have a real soul? Technologically, sure. It's I think in many ways it was we can call it a success case. But there's also the other side of it. I think Songdo still is evolving to a definition of what it actually is as a city. And these are that kind of challenges. How do you make this a place of people, not just technology? What is that depth and color that makes a place? Right. The other thing I would like to say, go ahead.
We would just kind of along those same lines. We have a question from the audience. Would you say that there's a difference in thinking and planning a future smart city for a homogeneous culture versus a more diverse culture?
I think cities should be planned to be diverse, right from what they are. They are dominated in, I mean, they'll reflect the culture that they're in. That's why part of the reason you want to go to a city. Boston is very different from LA. Atlanta is extremely different from Boston. The culture is part of the soul of a city. And you don't want to change that. I'm not sure, when we create a global community, I don't think it's like going to the Sheratons where they all seem to be the same no matter what country you're in. You want to see that culture reflected, and you want to know that you're in a special place. So I don't think, so, for example, if we were to build Atlanta purely on a southern feel, will it become a destination interesting where people want to move there and live there and make their lives there? Because that's what cities are. They're places where people make their lives. So the whole, when you do something like Atlanta, 10 acres is a big site in a city. You don't own that land in an essence. Yeah, in title and legally, you may have ownership, but what you're taking on is a massive responsibility. It's a massive responsibility to create something that links itself into the surrounding city. So I guess the question really comes down to, does it work better in a sort of homogeneous type of environment where you can drive through much more central planning this kind of development? Or is it I'm not sure. If you take cities out of their context of their regions, I don't know how they become really anything else but a reflection of the roots of their environment.
Right. Hey, Pietro, we have just enough time to run through what I think is the fun part. We'd like to put up a photo chronology of Songdo from when it was mud and dirt, and over the course of 14 years, how it became a smart city, which We hope will give you a true picture of the magnitude and the complexity of this project.
Well, and I'll also step back a little bit with technology is, I would say the advantage of Songdo is that we had central government involvement and real public policy driven mandates. And the challenge with Atlanta, and you have a homogeneous society that understands that. And really in Korea, there's a real, the Daehan Mingguk, the mindset of Korea. Whereas in Atlanta, it's a private development. So you don't have a central authority. The developer becomes that central authority who then communicates and interlinks with the government, institutions around it. And that you have to create a public-private dialogue, or it can't be successful, because you're building something that will go beyond you one day and is part of what Atlanta is all about. And you've contributed to its new definition. So that is a real difference in answering that question is, can a private developer play that role to some degree as a central planner, driver that motivates those others who come into this project and contribute by building buildings and take their risk? Can you get them to also buy into that vision, that why they're there is to help contribute to creating an advanced by its DNA urban plan and overcome the concerns of economics and risk in doing that, and that they have also a responsibility to build for the city, not just as a private development to make a few bucks in 5 years. And
Hey, so
let's put that one up now.
But as you're doing this, I also wondered whether you could answer a question for me that I think a lot of the audience is curious about, and I've asked you this question before and maybe wasn't entirely surprised by the answer. But as you're going through this, would you tell us, in your opinion and experience, what's easier, Pietro, dealing with the Songdo IBD years ago or your development in Atlanta now?
You have to be a bit of a masochist to do this at all. Both have their incredible complexities and challenges. Scale, when you're operating at scale to develop something, and both are ground up at scale, the challenges are enormous. The barriers are tremendous. It reminds me of that saying of the probabilities of success low, chances of getting killed high. Great, sounds like the right project for me. That I would say is, as the entrepreneur, and that's what another huge difference between Atlanta and Songdo. Although there was a tremendous, without that entrepreneurial spirit of the Gale Company, nothing could have happened. The entrepreneur lives in the future, sees things that other people don't see, and hopefully they catch up. That's also called Amazon. So I would say Atlanta is a purely entrepreneurial initiative, thought of by a guy or in a restaurant. Why can't you integrate it all into one place and then build it from the ground up to be the most advanced, urban infrastructure on the planet? So that I guess is the answer to that. Is you really have to. When you start off an initiative like this, that black hole is concept and idea, 4 guys sitting around a table. If you're lucky enough to start to drive momentums, there's a point called the event horizon, I call it, where your life just absolutely fragments, and the momentums of all of these stakeholders and communities and people who see its opportunities and those who aren't sure why this should be done at all. It defines your entire life going forward. This is where Songdo started. And for the audience, this is where ideas start. Ideas often start in whether it's an Amazon or an Apple or it's a city. This is the landscape that one is looking at, because what you're envisioning doesn't exist at that time. And this is what we came on to, 4 of us sitting around a table called the Secret Songdo Society, because frankly, we were so sure that everybody thought we would be out of our minds that one of the first things we said was, we have to keep a very tight communications protocol to this, because if it gets out too soon and people speculate and doubt too much, your barriers become too high. And we had to get to a certain point in planning and preparation and in moving forward with this, that was the landscape we looked at. This was the master plan with, as I say, KPF, to say, how would 1,600 acre new city look like? And how can you do best in class, as Tim said, with all of the best around the world? Sometimes that's a harmonic. Other times it's a collision. Is it a collage of ideas or a collision of ideas? We ran into a bit of that as well. This was what the site looked like in 2003 as the government pushed the land reclamation. You see, it's just a peninsula jutting out into the sea, and it didn't exist. This side, do I have it on the screen, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just remind me. This is our side. This is what it looked like 3 years later. And a lot of that is settling soils. It has to be pounded and set to a tinsel that would support buildings and all the things we want to do. This was in going on to 2004 with the government infrastructure. And boy, the Koreans are the best in the world when it comes to infrastructure. They just go at it, and their efficiency is mind-boggling. This is the city starting to in 2005. What our job was is to master plan this and then manage the development of its core as the master developer, and then sell off the parcels under a very strict master plan in terms of FARs and uses and all of that. And we were the ones who managed that. This was the first construction of the residential parcel 1. These were the first residential buildings. If this project had failed, this is another thing about the entrepreneurial activity. Your first phase must be successful. You must prove all of your thesis, that technology can drive value, that understanding that creating this new platform, this new place, you can sell that idea and that people will respond to it. If you fail on that first one, you're in real trouble. And this all had to start with a feasibility study to say, yes, we think we can do this. This is that complex by 2005-06. It's all coming out of the ground. This was the 65-story Northeast Asia Trade Tower. The Central Park is being built. This was to bring the sea into the middle of the city through a master plan.
Pietro, we have 1 minute.
Okay. People do this to me. Okay. It's hard to do 30 billion in 5 minutes, but anyway.
I know.
This is as the city starts to evolve. We created a center, that Central Park. That's where the values were. That's where the initial developers really came in. These are all private developments. Okay. This is the northern end of the city. As you can see by this red circle, I'm taking you on a tour of where we are through the development process. Now we had to create cultural icons, things that reminded you that this is a Korean place. This was back to that answer, the question that had been asked. This is by 2016, this is, you can see the Central Park. You can see now people are boating. You can see that residential housing all along it has quickly evolved. The tower has been done. This doesn't tell you about going through that world economic crisis and the nightmares that this project had to go through. This is what the city looks like at this point. These are just pictures of it before, after. Before, this is the bridge. The airport is here. Songdo is here. This is what we were. There wasn't even a planned bridge at the time when we started, but this is the bridge today. It's extraordinary. It even had issues that you had to be able to turn a battleship around underneath this. So yeah, it has one of the widest spans in the world. This is the golf course area. You can see the backdrop to it. This is the backdrop of the Jack Nicklaus golf course that's there now. And this is what we started with, conceptual, the black hole. This is, if you drive over the bridge today, what you see today. An integrated smart city. What with all of that means, it has a central planning area. It was developed by Cisco, so that data from the streets, energy uses, 40% of LEED quality buildings built in Korea are in Songdo City, and they're all interconnected. So it's a demand management that gets, the demand management is controlled through a central place called G Tower.
Yeah, sure, that really is exceptional. And if I had to keep up with the theme of summing this up with one word, I think you hit it on the nail with the word extraordinary. Really, thank you so much for sharing the wealth of knowledge and your years and years of experience with this project and smart cities generally. Pietro, Tim, thank you so much for your time. I know, Tim, you're almost into tomorrow in your time zone, and I do appreciate you joining us today. I have to move on with our next panel.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it.
Sorry,
Thank you
we ran
very
over.
much.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about our projects.
Our next panelists on here, we are joined by Terry Olnik, Michael Cohen, and the session will be led by Catherine McCullough, a partner with our Toronto office at Denton's. Our next session is on the impact of drones, digital twinning, and advances in prop tech on the evolution of the construction industry, construction and inspection processes.
Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be here and talk about prop tech and drones and what's happening in the real estate development and inspection industries. So I have with me, I'll start with Michael Cohen of Key AI. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Key AI, a company that's revolutionizing industrial inspections and managing the data that's generated. It is an enterprise AI platform that combines drone inspection software with an AI labeling tool, AI-assisted computer vision, and machine learning. He acts as the chair of the board of directors of Unmanned Systems Canada, Canada's industry association specifically for drones, and has since 2019. He is the vice chair for the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Committee for the Standards Council of Canada, a mirror committee to that of the International Organization for Standardization. And before his current roles, he had a lengthy career as a commercial airline pilot. So he certainly outranks me in that regard on the flight deck. And also we have Terry Olnik of Multiplex Canada. Terry is the president and managing director at Multiplex Canada. Multiplex is a premier global construction company, shaping skylines and delivering iconic projects for over 55 years. With more than 25 years in the Toronto construction industry himself, Terry has expert knowledge of the local market and long-standing collaborative relationships within the industry. Terry is LEED accredited and is on the board of directors for the Canada Green Building Council Toronto chapter. He's also the co-chair of the Urban Land Institute Toronto membership committee. Welcome to you both, Terry, Michael. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Terry. Thanks. It's a
Great.
pleasure.
And Terry, you're joining us from Toronto this morning, and Michael, you're in the US, is that right?
I'm in Houston. They've just lifted the tornado warning. There's been rotation rolling through an area that I'm in. It's a convention area called the Woodlands. So this could be interesting over the next 30 minutes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, if we lose you, we'll hope you're safe, but forge ahead. So I have a series of questions that I have for you today, and I'll direct a few at one or the other of you, but please feel free to jump in. This should be much of a dialogue, and I think the intersections in your specialties will really provide a lot of interesting insights for the group with us today. So let's start at basics. Many have heard of the concept of prop tech. So what is it? And how are your companies engaging with prop tech? And please use examples. Terry, perhaps I'll turn it over to you to start.
Okay, thanks, Catherine, and hello, Michael, and I hope it all works out for you with regards to the tornado watch.
Well, if I drop off, it's not a tough question. It's a tornado. So let's just go with that.
That's great. I would say that, you know, the construction industry and the development industry have been laggards in adopting technology, if you will. They're very traditional in what they do and how they approach things, and never seem to have enough time to want to stop and understand what's available. And it now just seems that there's convergence of all of this technology, and it's become overwhelming for a lot of people. So it's really about understanding, you know, what is your strategy? What is it you want to accomplish? And how are you going to organize yourself in such a way that you can stop, understand the technology, understand if it's right for yourself or your company, and then start to move the ball forward. So I think today's conversation will reveal you know, some of the things people will want to consider and think about as they start to explore these relevant technologies for their companies.
Thank you. Michael, do you have anything to add on that?
Well, sure. I think about prop tech really about you know, this buy and sell and rent. I think that's the initial space. I actually just sold a second property, and the transaction was exactly as it was when I bought my first property in 1995. The process was almost identical. It was archaic. So I think of it in terms of those sorts of digital platforms that are giving insights into how we transact, obtain, and leave property. But I think for this session, we probably want to expand that a little bit more into other technologies that are coming really just into buildings to make them more livable and more efficient. One of the things in the convention center that's a good indication of where things are going is the floor cleaner and the floor waxer here at midnight, you know, till 5 in the morning, which used to be manned by an individual, pretty redundant job, is now a robot that does this. It's humanless, it goes about its routine. So I think there's this sort of like, what's the new way in which we get information about obtaining property all the way through to the technology that's running the properties.
That I couldn't agree more. There's this technology shift that's layering onto our old ways of doing things, whether that's in the construction industry or how we take care of buildings and how we take care of cities, that really converges with a mentality shift or a mentality change, and the technology is pushing that forward all the time. So why don't we jump right in? I'll direct my next question at Michael to start, and it really focuses on data. And prop tech, and in particular drones, have allowed us to collect rich, voluminous data. And that's about buildings, that's about remote or difficult to access assets or on construction sites. So gathering that data is obviously the goal, but the data has to be rationalized, it has to be useful. So based on your experience, what challenges are created by large quantities of data when it's available, and how are those challenges being overcome?
Well, that's like an incredibly timely question, because my sense of this sorts of the movement for robotics was the last 10 years have seen, you know, we've gotten these drones to be able to fly and become incredibly capable. We've gotten these indoor robots to be able to do simultaneous localizing, so understanding their environments and being able to move very sophisticatedly through complex environments. You know, think about like Roomba plus, you know, like Roomba Uber. And then this has caused this influx of a tremendous amount of data. So, which is really, really useful, but we've got this challenge of how do you take in all this particularly geo-referenced information? So 3D models of the interiors of buildings or the exterior of buildings, doing that in multiple data sources like visual or even thermal, so you're understanding your building envelope for energy loss, and then all of the sensors that are running with running the building, providing independent data sources, and now posed a problem of how do you aggregate all of this to get a 360 view of your building. And that's precisely what's before the industry to drive it at this point in time.
That's fantastic. So how are you addressing those challenges? How's your company trying to rationalize it and move it forward?
Well, these are really about digital platforms that are accessible to individuals, that integrate with existing digital platforms, legacy platforms that are on the building or new ones that are coming into the building. So you're pushing me for an example. So if someone was running a building management program that now wants to add monitoring of the building envelope, buildings are incredibly wasteful for energy. You know, we probably think about more sort of carbon traditional wastefulness in terms of energy. Buildings leak a tremendous amount of energy. If you're a hospital, you're probably incredibly concerned understanding water infiltration in your roof, particularly over devices like MRIs. You're interested in leaky windows, those sorts of things. So you've got employee health, you've got obviously patient health, all those sorts of things. So now you have the ability to monitor that with a drone that could autonomously fly around your hospital and daily take on this sorts of information. Problem is you've got a gap between whoever's operating the drone. Do they have a digital platform to be able to create and localize this type of imagery? And then how is that imagery ingested into some sort of legacy? And then who's going to do something about it? Someone ultimately has to be able to understand it, review it, get in the field, and then do some sort of restoration work on it. And all of that takes a really sophisticated workflow. You just simply need to figure out who gets the information, do they understand it, and what do they do with it? And that really is about digital tools speaking to each other.
Speaking to each other to allow people to actually take action based on all that data that's accumulated.
So if someone's in charge of the roof and a drone's flying around, then somehow we got to get that person the information, and so they understand it. So one, the information probably has to be processed into something that's understandable. It's got to be quantified in terms of, in prop tech, you're probably dealing in issues that are square footage sort of issues. How do you replace those sorts of things? And then carries further down into the value prop chain. So someone's got to procure a replacement, find a vendor to do these sorts of things. So all of that information needs to carry right down to, in this instance, roofing, so someone can bid on it and go and do the restoration work. Then you've got all this follow-on of commissioning the work afterwards, and then warranty and maintaining. So this is a really, really rich data chain that's in the circle of multiple stakeholders.
Well, and an interesting legal issue that flows from that too is if we carry on with the hospital example, is if the hospital has knowledge of some issues with the roof, water leakage or whatever, based on the data that's been collected and interpreted by AI software or otherwise, then my dog has a lot to say about this particular legal issue. Then it becomes a liability problem for a building owner or a municipality or whoever is that's operating the facility, because they know of a problem. So it compels people to take steps. So I'll direct my next question primarily to Terry. Terry, I'd like if you could to take us through what digital twinning is and explain how the use of digital twins can make a building, a campus, or an entire city smarter. And really, in particular, I think the group is interested in where you see the growth and development of this technology, the use of digital twins in the coming years.
Okay, well, Michael raised some great points about the amount of data that you can gain by simply flying a drone over a roof, and what do you do with it, and who gets the information. Imagine 5 years out from now, as these technologies are prevalent and in our everyday lives, and the amount of data that's going to get built up as we go through this. Just a very, very simple example is your smartphone. Once upon a time, you might have had 10 pictures on it, flipping from a flip phone that actually took pictures to now having thousands of pictures on your phone. And what do you do with them, right? And then you switch your phone and, oh, geez, what am I going to do with all my old pictures? So personally, I have thousands and thousands of pictures, and I need to find a way to figure out what I'm doing with them all. So now imagine, that on steroids, as these drones and cameras are taking pictures everywhere. So a digital twin really should be a North Star for everyone in their journey in data. As buildings become smarter and operators become smarter and cities become smarter, you need to find a way to organize data so that it's stored in the right location. It can be used for AI and accessible, readily accessible to everyone, where you're not spending all this time trying to find information. What did that roof look like 6 years ago? Who was the manufacturer of that roof? Who installed that roof? All of that information in a proper digital twin is at your fingertips. And that's what the journey is with a lot of property owners today, as they're setting out, especially new construction. What is it that we want to harvest in terms of information, and where do we want it to reside? And it's an asset register for static and live assets in your building that are meant to be beneficial for you at any moment's time, and even start to predict for you. That's where people need to start to think about a digital twin. So in construction and in design, if you're setting out to build a building, at minimum, you should be asking your designers to be designing in 3D models, in Revit models, that can be a collaboration amongst all of the designers and the owner and the constructor, and keeping that data as accurate as possible through the construction journey to hand over to the owner. And once everyone understands that information is going to end up in a digital twin, it makes it a lot easier for everyone to align and collaborate and put the information where it needs to be. So then in 5 years from now, when you are flying the drone over the building, you know exactly where that information belongs in the digital twin.
That's such an endorsement for having a digital twin and really ensuring that all the information you collect is organized from the outset. I think, Terry, you had a presentation too that you wanted to share. Now would be a great time, and if so, I just asked our tech people to start sharing the screen. And Terry, when you would like the slide change, just go ahead and say slide change.
Okay, slide change, please. So in Toronto, Multiplex is is part of construction management and what we call pre-construction. So being part of the design on several projects across the city. You'll see on the left is One Delisle. We've been in pre-construction with Slate Developments for almost a year now, and we've been the one facilitating and participating in a live federated model for that specific building. So it's a great example of how you can be organized early to set out for an ultimate digital twin for a building, should the owner choose to use it. Another great example would be the Bay Adelaide North project, right in the core of the CBD here in Toronto. That is digital twin ready, and all of the information that's been prepared through design, through construction, ultimately to hand over to Brookfield Properties, is another great example of how property owners now are starting to put a flag in the ground and start to really expect organized data from onset of design. Next slide.
Terry, I'll jump in with a question that came to mind. So from a smart city perspective, if all of the buildings or many of the buildings in a downtown core had a digital twin and they were keeping records of the construction process and data collected while the building is live, how do you think that would contribute to the functionality of a smart city?
I think, well, there's a couple ways to answer that. What comes to mind for me is resiliency in the data availability of the buildings, and ensuring that when people have a strategy to collect all this data, use all this data, make a smart city, that's going to have tremendous impact on infrastructure. Okay, you want to make sure that all of your buildings are capable of staying connected through any sort of condition in a city. We're going to be seeing a lot of challenges with global warming, water issues, those types of things. And it's sort of funny how we're advancing ourselves to really get smart, and how buildings act on their own, but also part of an infrastructure of the city. And yet we're going to be challenged in how we can count on those systems. So let's use battery storage and EV, for example. You know, in the not too distant future, people who are parking their Teslas and electric cars in buildings will become part of an overall microgrid. Okay, and there will be pockets of the city that need additional power that are going to talk to a different building and say, hey, turn on those cars and start releasing power from those cars because we need the power over here. That's the interconnectedness that you're going to start to see in cities as it relates to a very small example of microgrids or microclimates in need of power. Eventually, people are going to be able to they're going to be expected to talk to other buildings and through the grid. And that's where being digital twin ready with your building and having information flow is going to be so important to the community as a smart city. And that's only one small example. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. It absolutely did. Thank you.
All right, next slide.
Oh, I think I interrupted you before you were talking about my favorite subject, which is drones.
Oh yeah, well, we'll get into that next. That's okay, next slide.
Okay, great. Michael's favorite subject too, I think.
When we, next slide, yeah. So when we started, when drone first became available, it was from a construction perspective, we loved it because we didn't have to hire pilots or helicopters to go and take pictures, aerial pictures of our sites. You know, it was pretty awesome, you know, to send a drone up and then you realize there were all of these issues around legality and how you can fly a drone and what pictures you can actually start to take. So we had to actually start to become very careful on how we deployed our drones. Next slide. So this is what we plan to use drone for is not only site progress, but also quality control and quality monitoring. So as we start to harvest data on comparable, so this exact building we've already built virtually, right to the finest detail, connection details, how we plan to seal the building, how we're going to keep it watertight, et cetera, et cetera. Drones are going to give us eyes where we can't go as humans, and the efficiency of it and the consistency of it will allow us to build a much higher quality building than traditionally was done. When you look at One Delisle, these are very sophisticated angles in this building, and you really want to make sure that you're adhering to the highest quality standards in that, and that's where we see the benefit in the drone. Next slide. So we talk about data aggregation and construction. Construction is rapidly going from something very traditional to something very sophisticated in the approach to construction. So we're going to have drone data, we're going to have schedule data, we're going to have logistical data, we're going to have federated models. So all of the design that's put together in 3D, when you layer it on top of each other, you start to realize where things work and don't work. So that's one aspect of construction, is getting it all to fit without having disruption during the actual construction process, predicting where these problems are going to occur, before they occur, so that you can save the most valuable thing in construction, and that's time of your resources, the physical people building on site or the material that's come to site, because you've already solved the problem before it happened. So we take all of that information and swirl it into what we call a 4D model. Next slide. So in having that information available to us as builders, we also like to validate not only the building, but the surrounding areas. So this is an example of, as we're constructing, you're going to be shaping the earth, and you want to make sure that you're trending towards the right product, you're achieving the right efficiency. So you can also do productivity monitoring. And then ultimately the final goal is, have we achieved what we wanted to at a grand scale? And this is a LiDAR map that we count on. Next slide. Now we're capable of monitoring construction through AI and technology, cameras on the crane, the hook, through the drones, etc. And what we're starting now to see in construction is where we've built up through the model, the construction process, we can validate at very rapid speed that this building is being built the way we planned it, with the right productivity, and build that information and drop it straight into the model. So now what we're getting is scan to BIM. Once upon a time, you'd have someone go around the site, measure productivity, then they'd go back, mark up a set of drawings, and then that person would then take that and represent it in a BIM model, and that was very time consuming. Now that process can happen almost instantaneously through current models, is what we're starting to see. It's called scan to BIM. There's a company out there out of Waterloo called BuiltStream that's pioneering some of this right now. Next slide. So we've taken what's called a model first approach as a construction company. We make it very clear that the expectation is we're going to need everybody to participate and collaborate, all of these stakeholders in the BIM model right from the onset of planning. So a moment zero decision, that there will be a federated model, that there will be collaboration through construction digitally. So when you walk around our construction sites and our offices, you don't see any paper plans. There are no paper drawings in our offices on site and in the office. We do everything virtually and digitally on screens. And we collaborate through tools like Procore in construction.
And Terry, the main driver of this is, one of the main drivers behind a smart city is that it's efficiency. It's being proactive and using the information we have to avoid problems, to save cost and make things easier. So does that sound, it sounds like that's what you're really driving at here with this model first approach.
Absolutely avoiding waste. Waste in material, time, and people. Next slide. We'll go to the next slide, please. So long ago, about 8 years ago, Multiplex started utilizing scan data to validate construction. And so that was very effective for us on the Wembley Stadium in London. Next slide. Queen's Wharf is being built currently in Brisbane in Australia. Next slide. And Opus in Dubai. And the reason I showed these different pictures from different parts of the globe is because this is global adoption right now. What we're starting to see is it's not just in North America that these technologies and techniques are being used. They're being refined and improved throughout the globe. And when I showed you a picture of Wembley Stadium, you know, a scan of that building may have taken all night. It may, you know, they may have set the the scanner out at a certain point, scanned it all night, and then it would probably take 3 days to process the data. Whereas now, this is happening almost instantaneously. So the information is coming to us a lot faster and a lot quicker. Next slide. Again, though, it's more and more data, and what are you doing with it, and how are you making it relevant? So that's why we love the idea of setting the digital twin as the North Star for us, as the compass points towards it. It helps us understand what information we're going to take, how we're going to organize it, and then when we're done our project, we actually will be ready with what's called a level of design 400 model in BIM. BIM stands for Building Information Management. So once that is ready, you can take it to the owner and say, you're 3/4 of the way there for the digital twin of this building. What they then need to do is layer in IoT, Internet of Things, and what they want to capture as active assets versus static. You know, a building can have 50, 60,000 static assets that will all reside perfectly organized in the digital twin and available at the click of a button. You can go to a VAV box or a pump, click on it, understand what was asked for in the design, when was it placed, where was it bought, how much was it paid for, how is it currently performing? Next slide. I think this next slide is where we shift to the video. Here we go. Thanks for sitting through that. It's a bit salesy, but it does bring a point to how rapid our industry is changing and how much we're counting on this sophisticated modeling to now take construction to that next level. If anybody is involved in construction or is planning a development, they're currently seeing a massive increase in cost. The escalation in cost in construction right now is unprecedented. And the last thing you can afford to do is waste time and material or people. And that's why de-risking the project is so important, and having that plan to accurately build with precision as you build the model, which then lends itself to the digital twin. And you don't have to just get your model, your information from drones. It can also come from other aspects. So as an example, on the Bay Adelaide North project, we had a company called Onsite IQ walking around the site with a backpack that contained several cameras, and it's similar to a Google Street Map. They would walk the same route multiple times a month, gather the data, and then we use that data to help support collaboration. It helped the consultants understand during COVID that we were progressing the site with quality. It helped the owner understand that this is the progress that's taken place, and our subtrade community really benefited from this because we were able to give productivity against costs for billings that allowed the trades to get paid. And then ultimately, we keep this information in the model. So if somebody ever had to go back, or if Brookfield wanted to renovate this floor, they know exactly what they're dealing with in terms of infrastructure in the building. Next slide. Next slide. If you look at a life cycle cost of a building, which again, one building, now you think about that in a smart city, how many buildings are going to be taking the same approach? Planning is 1% of the cost, design's 2%, construction 22%, but operations of the life cycle of the building is 75%. And one way to understand if your digital twin or your smart city is effective is measuring the impact it has on people. So if in a non-smart building, if it takes you 15 minutes to get from parking lot to your desk, in a smart building or a smart city, if you can get from the parking lot to your desk in 4 minutes, because you knew exactly where to park, the elevator was waiting for you, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things have been predicted through models. That's when you know that your model has been successful, because the cost of people in the building is the most expensive part of a building and what the asset is. Next slide. So I mentioned before, there's an asset registry that comes along with the digital twin. It helps you organize where all of that information is going to reside. And all of that information is readily available on your mobile, your laptop, your iPad. And that's really important for people to start to understand how they actually are going to manage their data and store their data. Next slide. I'll just bring one thing to the fore. You know, especially through COVID, a lot of sustainability efforts sort of went to the wayside and wasn't front top of mind. Now that we're sort of coming out of this, it's really important for people to understand there's a lot more to construction than the final product. Always keep in mind that, you know, the decisions we're making with material selection have a carbon impact. And now with sophisticated models, not only are we doing 4D where you measure time and space, we're now measuring cost through the course of construction. We can predict the cost so that the client is very versed as to where the cash flow is going to be versus the built form, but also embodied carbon. And it's really important for people to understand that technology is available today to make those decisions, predict the embodied carbon footprint of their building, and make decisions to help reduce that before the material is selected. And that also can reside in the digital twin model. And you think about smart cities and the trillions of square feet that are going to get built between now and 2050, if everyone is mindful of the embodied carbon impacts those are going to create, they can create or save, again, the model will help you with that. Next slide. And this is an example of helping understand sort of a single pane of glass, how you can make material selection and how it impacts the overall embodied carbon aspect of your project. Next slide. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Terry. I think particularly ending on the point about sustainability and shifting our focus back to that now that we've come through this crisis, or we're starting to leave this crisis, is important. And so we've spent time talking about new builds. Let's talk about, we don't have that much time left, so this will probably be our final question. But let's talk about existing assets and existing infrastructure that that needs attention. A recent paper by KPMG said that in Canada, about 14% of our existing infrastructure is below standard. I don't think it said unsafe, but it would not meet our condition standards. So municipalities and private companies are dealing with the impact of aging infrastructure. So how do you see prop tech or drones being part of a path forward to repair and make smarter that existing infrastructure we have? And maybe Michael, I'll turn it to you to start off.
So this is the big question that this industry is facing around asset condition monitoring, infrastructure, state of affairs around infrastructure. Absolutely everything's old, not in very good shape, and we're increasing pressure on it through just things like population and use. So things like our electrical grid, bridges, those sorts of things. If we're adding 5% or 6% to each city each year, then these sorts of things obviously are going to be under increased pressure. We also have climate change and other things and weather events that are impacting these. So, and we seem to have less resources in terms of workforces that are able to go out and do these sorts of things. So where are we looking for the solution? Well, that's in digital innovation, in remote sensing, those sorts of things. So being able to get information in and decisions, obviously, about the most dangerous and the oldest sorts of things. So satellite information now is readily available. We're using airplanes for geospatial information, robots, which are ground-based, could even be marine-based actually, and drones, of course, have exploded to give information about this sort of thing. And I think it's information in aggregate and decisions about where to apply attention first. And so we're in this reactive phase. And I think where everyone wants to get to and to drive to is in this predictive phase, where we tip over this point where we've got enough information now in digital systems where we're actually saying, okay, we understand that the rate of change of that bridge is going to take attention in 5 years. And that's really where we need to start. That's really where we're driving to try and get insights and then move from this manual cranes off the side of a bridge or blackouts like we've continued to see, into trying to get out in front of this thing. It's a massive challenge.
And I think too, one of the things you touched on is the human cost and the human effort that's required to gather this information and to get to that point where we're being proactive and not just reactive. And this technology, in particular drones, can give us information that we can't even get safely with people. So too, there's massive opportunity, and certainly why people are turning to this technology. What do you think on that point, Terry?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities out there for people to understand where they want to go with data, how they want to deploy technology. I think it's really important for people to sit back and just have a plan for what they want to do and want to accomplish. All this aging infrastructure, I don't think people understand the significance of it. I think, the Department of National Defense, from what I understand, has deployed scanning of over 30,000 assets right now, just to harvest and organize what it is they have and what they're dealing with, right? Once that happens, what are you going to do with the information, and what's your plan beyond that to start, repairing or improving these facilities? And improving is one thing, but future use is a totally different aspect of infrastructure. Already people are starting to plan for what's going to be the next phase of the parking lot that we've created. You know, I'm starting to see plans for, yes, it's a parking garage for the next 10 years, but after that, it's going to become either water storage. Can it be used for additional retail spaces? Can it be used for battery storage? So I think, you know, understanding where the world is going and what the needs are, especially from a resiliency perspective, are going to be key. So gathering the data, having a plan for it, structuring it into a digital twin, and then being a digital twin ready facility and or a city is really, really important. You know, I wonder, you know, who from the city of Toronto, if anyone is on this call right now, and what's their vision as an example of what Toronto will look like in 10 years? And are they giving guidance on expectations for how you will be a good neighbor or a good person in the community as a building owner or owner of multiple assets, and how you can contribute to that?
I think, Terry, I think that word community is a perfect spot to conclude, because the panels we've heard so far and what we'll hear this afternoon drives at that community, and really, I think, is a call to action for all of us to get that plan together and coordinate efforts and have a real vision for how things will unfold. And I fully expect PropTech will be prominently featured in that. So Terry, Michael, thank you again so much for your time. I know it's precious, but you've had some tremendous insights for us today, and certainly we'll encourage you to connect with any of the City of Toronto folks who are online today, and I can facilitate that afterwards to keep the dialogue going. Kat, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Terry and Michael, for joining us. That was a really exhilarating session. And I like the wrap up on community. Great video, Terry. I think that definitely recharged my batteries. And again, my apologies for Zoom booting me out at the beginning of your session. We're going to try to make up some time now. Again, thank you all. And we're moving into our next session. The next session is on using technology to improve the development process, which segues nicely from our previous topic. Joining us for this session are my colleague, Mary Ellen Bench, Arash, and Ralph. Mary Ellen will introduce Arash and Ralph, but just briefly, to make up some time, I will outline Mary Ellen's bio and experience. Mary Ellen serves as counsel in the Denton's Municipal Planning, Land Use, and Development Law Group with me, where she advises a broad range of public and private sector clients on governance, municipal law, development, infrastructure, and related matters. Throughout her career, clients and colleagues alike have relied on Mary Ellen's exceptional skill set and professional excellence to lead numerous infrastructure and development projects, provide significant input on governance matters and municipal legislative reform, and advise on many municipal corporate development and finance matters. She has more than 30 years of experience working in the municipal public service, both with the City of Toronto and the City of Mississauga. Mary Ellen is also an active member of our Denton's Canada Smart Cities think tank. She frequently participates on panels providing insight within this space and how our clients, including developers and municipalities, can leverage smart technologies to plan for and create communities based on principles of healthy, sustainable development and ways to improve the development process. Mary Ellen has also been chosen as an annual contributor to the Thomson Reuters O'Brien's Encyclopedia of Forms publications, form publications to provide legal insight from a smart cities perspective. So over to Mary Ellen to introduce Arash and Ralph, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks very much, Kat, for that introduction. We have a great panel today, and as Kat said, it fits very nicely with the last conversation. So our issue is using technology to improve and change the development approvals process to reduce both time and confusion. Arash Shahi is joining us today. He is an entrepreneur and innovator with significant achievements in the architectural, engineering, construction, and academic sectors. He is recognized for his ability to bring stakeholders together on collaborative initiatives and is a digital technology visionary. He was recently named one of the top 40 under 40 in Canadian construction. Arash holds a PhD in construction engineering and management technologies and is CEO of Eco Innovation Lab, which he co-founded to lead digital transformation of AEC industries and governments through a collaborative R&D projects, innovative products, and expert consulting. He is also an adjunct professor at the University of Waterloo and is the research chair of the Toronto BIM community. And he sits on the board of directors of Building Smart Canada. Our other speaker is also extremely accomplished, Ralph Kaminsky. He is currently Chief Building Official and Director of Building Services at the Town of Oakville. Before joining the Town of Oakville, Ralph was the Chief Building Official for the City of Waterloo for a number of years. Ralph is a great believer in creating efficiencies through standardization and digitization, and is very active in working to accomplish this in the region of Halton and beyond. So thank you for joining us today, Arash and Ralph. We have a number of matters that we'd like to go through today. So I guess the first question I had, we've heard a lot about today, the building process in Canada and the delays. It takes a long time to get a permit in Canada. I think the World Bank survey ranked Canada as 64th out of 190 nations in terms of obtaining building permits. What do you see as the biggest problem, and how do you see us being able to tackle it? So, Araj, if we could start with you.
Sure, yeah. Good afternoon, I guess good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us on this panel. To answer your question, May, we've looked into this issue for a number of years. In my previous position at University of Toronto, we did a number of pilots with City of Toronto, Waterloo, when Rock was at Waterloo, and a few other municipalities. And the challenge that exists is that the processes, and Rolf can talk to this a lot better than I can, but the existing systems are very paper-based. There are manual processes in place, and the governments haven't really kept up with the technology that's been happening on the industry side. So we are relying on paper-based manual processes. And one of the biggest, from all the research that we've done over the years, one of the main issues that we identified was the communication between municipalities and all the different stakeholders. Because often you have a number of different agencies that need to get involved in a single application. And the communication between these different agencies is very inefficient. So we have municipalities who are picking up e-permitting solutions and are going digital with their internal processes. We have regional governments who are investing in their digital infrastructure. And we have all sorts of agencies, including conservation, transportation, and others who are investing in their own digital infrastructure. However, these systems don't even talk to each other. So the one line of communication remains paper. Now, whether you fax the paper or you email the paper or you scan the paper, regardless, it is a paper-based communication. And that's something that we've kind of worked on for a number of years, and we can drill down more into that. But that lack of communication, lack of transparency in that communication, to me, is one of the underlying challenges with development.
Thanks. Ralph, you and I have both been on the inside of that experience. And is there anything you can add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the communication piece is vitally important. And Arash is right when it comes to moving paper. That is, across the province, probably the only thing that's consistent. But what I did notice in the previous presentation with the model first approach, even there, the government was not mentioned. There was not a circle representing the planning or the building department. And I see that as one of the challenges as well. There's a lot of work that's done without the involvement of the municipalities. The example given about the future state in a garage becoming a battery storage potentially. Fantastic idea, wonderful idea. If it's zoned to allow that, that could be a smooth transition. If it's not, maybe you want to take those 10 years while it's a parking structure and start planning for what it would take to get it to be a battery storage facility. And I know that was just an example, but I want to build on that example to show that the earlier the municipalities and the agencies are involved in those decisions, the better we can prepare for them. One thing that I find fantastic with the BIM technology is the fact that it's using static information and applying variables to that. There's a tremendous opportunity here for us to connect those assets with the codes and standards so that we could potentially generate software that will verify the assets that are illustrated on the BIM model actually are in compliance with the codes and regulations and that they're in the right place working in harmony with the building. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. There's a tremendous opportunity for this type of conversation to continue. I was fortunate enough to sit on other conferences. Actually, IBM had the international conference in Las Vegas a few years ago, and they talked about how government is not at the table and how government is slow to react. Well, if government is not invited, if government is not included or consulted, it's no wonder they're at the tail end. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to be part of this panel and this discussion and this movement is that they include us in your visions, include us in what's going on out there so that progressive municipalities like the town of Oakville, we can start to be ready for that. We won't react to you when you come to the counter with an innovative solution. We'll be ready. And some of the solutions will be greater than just an Oakville solution. Some of them may require a change, excuse me, at the provincial level. Some may even require a change at the federal level. So again, it's very important for us to be at the table, be part of these communications, and understand what some of the issues are.
And that's, as you say, all three levels of government have a role in terms of being involved in that. Can you explain a little bit more about the BIM model, the building information modeling, in terms of how it would fit with issuing permits?
I can jump into that. So just pointing on your last conversation about the three levels of government, I think I just want to highlight what Ralph was saying. We have progressive municipalities who are willing to test new technology, who are willing to push the envelope. But when you look at, we've done an international scan of government digitizations around the world. And in every single successful implementation, there has been a top-down approach. So we need the buy-in of the provincial and the federal governments if we're to make any sort of inroads at the municipal level. Because the reality is we got over 400 municipalities in Ontario, relying on individual municipalities to implement transformative change without having the support of the higher level governments is just not feasible. It has, and every other jurisdiction that has done this has had that support. Now, going to BIM, Canada remains the only G20 country without a national BIM man. So I think we need a few seconds to digest that. And that's just an indication of the lack of support from the top down. We've done 3 national BIM surveys to date. The next one is being launched next week. And these BIM surveys have indicated that our industry is ready. You heard from the last conversation that our design community and our developer community is investing in technology. But now we need the government to step up and take advantage. And to answer your question, we have the industry investing in BIM, which is basically a 3D parametric representation of a building. But then a municipality, and I'm not picking individual municipalities here, they would then expect you to print in 2D your 3D model and submit that for permit, right? There's a lot of information loss that's happening from that, going from the model, let alone all the costs associated with it. But there's a lot of information loss happening going from a 3D model to a 2D drawing that some municipalities you have to hand deliver. So it's paper. Rolf mentioned this before, once we have BIM as a way of submitting for a permit, then there's a lot of automation that can happen. Because even though a number of municipalities are talking about digitizing their services through e-permitting, it's basically the same process. They've just digitized the paper process. So you have instead of a paper drawing, you have a PDF drawing. But going to BIM, that's the true digitization, because with that digitization, you can then have automation. If you have a 3D model that comes into the municipality, then they can run automated code compliance on it. So you can check it against the building code before it even hits the municipality. You can check the code, you can check the fire code, the building code, the energy code, and it supports the national vision of Canada for moving towards performance-based codes. So to me, being able to equip the municipalities and the governments to leverage the investments already made by our industry in going digital towards a BIM platform, the opportunities are countless, and it also fits within the digital twin perspective, right? So if you have BIM models being submitted, then those BIM models will eventually form your digital twin. So that's another point of why municipalities should be interested in looking at in this technology going forward.
And I can see that technology being very helpful in today's world. Like, we talk about new construction, but there's also a lot of construction where you're taking a heritage building and you're building a tower on top of it, or otherwise using older buildings, so that having that 3D modeling would be very helpful to municipalities. So in terms of moving forward with this, you mentioned the role of the federal and provincial government in terms of financing, but I think there's also a role for them in terms of building code, because we have a national building code that applies to a lot of federally regulated buildings, and we have the provincial building codes. Are they equipped to fit in with a digital environment? Ralph, maybe you can start that.
Yeah, they're already working to harmonize the Ontario Building Code and the National Building Code. It's going to take a little bit more time than expected. In some areas, the Ontario Building Code is ahead of the National Building Code, and in other areas, the National is ahead. So what we're trying to do is take the best from both codes and marry them into one National Building Code. But just backing up for a minute, what Arash was talking about with the modeling, there are a lot of advantages to modeling. But for me, the first step is the improved quality of submission. If the documents are actually complete, as they would have to be for a model, there would be more accurate information submitted. I think one of the challenges municipalities face is getting all the information they need to process a complete application. There's always a rush to get everything through. So let's start the process as quickly as we can. Let's start a process with incomplete applications. I'm hoping that when we introduce the BIM system, you won't be able to do that. The documents will be far enough in advancement that a solution is imminent and that the solution can be considered. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work with the planning department of the municipality and start to use the BIM modeling to look at what that would actually look like. And I like the idea of the digital twin. It'd be fantastic to see what that building would actually look like virtually in the community in which it's being proposed, rather than anticipating, this model would be on this street. I think there's a real advantage for people to see in 3D what's happening. I think there's an opportunity for us to consider some of the requirements and ask ourselves, does it still make sense to ask for the requirements in the format they're asked for now? For example, a sun and shade study. Why do we need a report? Can't we just look at the building and evaluate what that building has, or the effect that building has on the neighbor? What if we looked at the open space? If we modeled that building and we showed people actually living in that building, we showed occupants outside and inside the building, we showed vehicular traffic in and out of the property, could we look at that and say, it looks like it's functioning, it looks like it meets the intent of our vision of what we wanted that development to look like? In order for us to get there, we're going to have to make some changes to the way that the action regulations are written. Again, that's why I think it's important for these types of conversations to take place, where we share with all levels of government, this is how we would like to design our buildings. This is how we would like to plan for our construction. How does that fit in with our rules and regulations? Can we change them so that the municipalities or the approval agencies are ready to accept it in this format? Again, that's why I'm super excited, because I don't think that conversation has started yet. We're all taking small steps to see what's right in front of us. But at some point, the requirement and the municipality are going to come together, or the approval agency, whoever that happens to be, and will they be ready to receive it in the way that it's presented? I love the example that Arash gave about the BIM model having to be flattened in 2D in order to be submitted. There's a lot of information lost there. That is true, but there will be also a lot of delays in getting approvals if the regulation that allows us to issue an approval hasn't caught up to the technology that's asking for it.
So where would you see as the starting point? Is it Like, do you need municipalities to be asking the provinces to move forward on this, or do you need the development industry, or do you need the two to work together? Arash, do you?
I think
Ralph?
Ralph, do you want to start?
So I think we need the two to work together. I think one of the challenges in Ontario in particular is the authority was transferred to the municipality. So we have a provincial code that's administered locally by the municipality. So there's a bit of a connect between what the province has authority over, they write the rules, and what the municipality accepts as their interpretation of those. So I think it's important for them to work together. And I know there are groups out there. There's the Chief Building Officials Group, there's the Ontario Building Officials Group, and we're all working with the province to try to maintain some harmony. But what I still think is missing is more of this exact exchange right here, where industry and government are coming together to understand what some of the pressures are.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit, we've looked into this problem for, again, quite a number of years. And our latest initiative, One Ontario, was formed for that particular purpose of bringing all the stakeholders together who need to be at the table, and then invite the government to join. So to Ralph's point, where we need to invite government, we're doing that. We have levels of government at the municipal level who are very engaged, but anything above municipal, it just takes a lot of effort to engage with the government. So not that people don't want to engage with the government, it's just that government is very, very slow, frustrating slow to respond. So in One Ontario, for example, we have the chief building officials, large municipality chief building officials, we have Ontario building officials, we have planners, we have the residential builders, we have the ICI sector builders, we have technology providers, we have the likes of Terion and HICRA and other organizations who are looking for this type of data. Everybody's at the table. And what we've reached out to the provincial government with was, you know what, we are all together. We want to be able to communicate with each other, but we don't have jurisdiction. Not a single municipality does not have jurisdiction. Even a single ministry doesn't have jurisdiction, right? So you would typically expect this to be within MMAH, Ministry of Municipal and Housing, but then you have conservation, you have other groups that are involved in the development approval. So this truly needs to be a provincially backed initiative to actually get this done. But as far as everybody else except the province, we've consolidated that support already, and we've basically reached out to the provincial government and asked them to get this done. And what we are really asking here is a data protocol, an open data exchange standard that basically sets the standard for communication between all different stakeholders that are involved in development approval, so that all these investments that we are making in digital transformations can be leveraged later. Otherwise, what we're going to end up with, we already know this industry is very siloed and fragmented. And what's happening today is we are creating digital silos now that need to be broken down before we can move on. So to your point, in terms of how to engage with the government, we've done, from a private sector perspective, we've done everything we could do. We've coordinated, we've consolidated the support. It's now time for the provincial government to step in and get this done, because again, from a jurisdiction perspective, it is only the provincial government that can get anything done in this space.
And I can see everybody who's involved in the development process, whether the municipality or whether the development industry, benefiting from having some standardization and predictability in terms of both what questions are being asked by the municipality, how applications are being processed, and the timelines. So it seems like a great initiative. So hopefully it moves forward and moves forward quickly to get us up to speed. Arash, you've talked before about other countries and what they're doing and where we stand on that. Like, how is that led in other countries?
Yeah, so we did an international scan of all local government digitization initiatives, and they refer to as e-permitting. And we identified 3 levels of e-permitting. Level 1 being digital submission of 2D drawings, so PDF submissions online. Level 2 is the BIM submission to municipalities, and level 3 is BIM plus GIS integration. Now, jurisdictions like Singapore started in 1995 on level 1, submission of 2D drawings. 20-something years later, Ontario is now moving to level 1. So we have municipalities who are going from paper to level 1, where everybody else is at levels 2 and 3. So that's what's happening. We have now Singapore, single state country, a lot easier to get things done. But we have European countries, we have UK that's moving in that space now. For a number of years, they've been doing this. It's a long process for you to, as a country or as a province, to become BIM enabled. It takes somewhere between 5 to 10 years because you have to start from larger projects and then you start including smaller projects. But we got to start that process sooner than later. The good news about going last is that there's a lot of examples that we can look at internationally. There's a lot of lessons learned. We're not reinventing the wheel, we're not doing anything dramatic. We're just catching up to what everybody else is already doing. So there's a lot of good news there in terms of reduced risk. So there's advantages of going last, but we need to get moving. So from an international perspective, lots of precedents, lots of lessons learned, lots of commercial solution to look at. So from an innovation perspective, it might sound like innovation to us, and it is, but from an international perspective, we are just catching up. So there's very little risk.
Yeah, so for us to use this as a tool to build on for a smart city, you'd mentioned the need for a performance-based code as opposed to our current code. So that does require a very different mindset in terms of how we move forward. I guess like we're starting the process in terms of asking the province for a building code that meets digital needs as we move forward. Is there any lessons learned from other countries that you think would benefit us in terms of starting that journey or speeding up that journey?
The reality of it is we need to be honest and decide if there is a will, right? If there is a provision, we have had elections federally and provincially focused on housing supply, right? We've talked about cutting red tape. We've talked about streamlining for as long as I can remember. But unfortunately, when it comes to it, how willing are the governments to actually get anything done? And I know I'm sounding a little skeptical, maybe Rolf can add a different perspective, but the reality of it is all of this is doable. There's nothing here we're talking about that's not doable. Other countries have done it. There just needs to be the will. We have the expertise. We have the expertise in this country. We have the talent. We have the expertise. We can help the government get things done, but the government would need to want to get things done. So updating the building codes, putting data standards in place, equipping the culture of innovation through performance-based goals, all of that is doable. And we have the talent locally to help the government to get it done. They just need to be at the table. That's my perspective on this. Again, nothing earth-shattering here as far as we're concerned from an innovation perspective. There's nothing earth-shattering. There's things have been done. However, if you want to comply to existing bureaucratic process in everything we do, then well, nothing gets done. But we do need that innovation to be enabled, and that enablement comes from the government, in my opinion.
One of the
Sorry,
one of
Ralph?
the challenges we have in Ontario is it's big, and we have 444 municipalities. So try to get 444 people organized. I mean, the examples that Arash gave with the larger areas like Singapore, they have a lot. Their challenges are different, but they're unified already. We have 444 municipalities. If you put 444 people in a room and ask them to agree on something, it will never happen, right? And that's why we keep saying, where does it go? Do we push it up to the government? Do we say the provincial government has to do it? That's a fundamental change from the way the code is written. As I said earlier, the code delegated that authority to the municipalities. So what we're trying to do is figure out how do we work within those rules And does that make sense? Or do we try to change the rules? Do we try to figure out, does the code need to be rewritten or adjusted to say that certain aspects should be governed at a provincial level while other aspects could remain at a municipal level? It's an interesting challenge. As I said, too many people, it's hard to get consistency. And are the projects big enough to justify BIM? Not in Oakville by itself, probably not even in Toronto by itself, maybe Ontario, but likely it would take at least all of Canada to get organized before we have enough capacity to say this makes sense, that we have a BIM mandate and that we have code standards that are unified. Breaking it down into small jurisdictions, I mean, that's not my area of expertise, but I'm just thinking about how complicated it sounds. I can't see it happening for just a small jurisdiction.
And we've been working for decades at the municipal level in terms of trying to resolve the issue of how long it takes to get through the permitting process. With some success, it's still lots of room for improvement. Ralph, you've been at the forefront of a lot of that, and you're working with Oakville and with the region of Halton on some of that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the tools you've got?
Yeah, it's actually even bigger than the region of Halton. So I'm part of what we call the Large Municipalities Chief Building Officials Group. So that's an organization, or not an organization, it's a group of municipalities that have a population of over 50,000. And we meet twice a year. We talk about issues and trends with the idea of trying to create harmony within our interpretation of the codes and standards, but also to utilize technology and look for common approaches to technology. We figure with this group of municipalities, 44, maybe we're up to 45 now, maybe we have a chance of bringing this together. So we're working together. We're looking to work with vendors, developers, anyone that has an idea that wants to share with us, what solutions do you have that could work for a collective group of municipalities, as opposed to taking one municipality at a time. So it takes a bit of effort on both sides. We need to get organized to have a common ask, and we would appreciate if the vendors came to the community and say, we have a common solution for this group of municipalities, so that we can start working instead of one-to-one, it's one-to-many, and we can start to create a solution. I refer to them as like-minded municipalities, right? So whatever that means, wherever they are within the province, we're no longer obligated or restricted on dealing with the municipality adjacent to us with the technology, just like this Zoom meeting. I don't know where everyone is, but we're all together.
Yep.
You know, geography does not play an important role. Same thing with technology. If we could take like-minded municipalities across the province, for now, maybe across the country, when we have a harmonized national code, that starts to get exciting for us to have opportunities.
Okay. Yeah, and at CBO, you have a lot of discretionary authority, whether it's conditional permits, occupancy permits, approvals. Will that help to standardize and maybe add a little better predictability in terms of how an application might be handled?
It may also frustrate it, because it is an individual chief building official that has that authority. And so one may be more comfortable with accepting something. So for me, that's why it's important to have tight rules around what authority a chief building official has. I think it's important for an applicant to be able to know whether their solution should be acceptable to a chief building official, and not rely on an individual's understanding of what's deemed acceptable or not. But I think that there's lots of room for improvement there. And again, for me, it's all about building relationships with the design community and with the building community, so that we have this trust and we understand that we're in this together. We're trying to together build a product. We're trying to get it out there as quickly as we can. We're trying to create a cost-effective solution. We want to consider the environment, carbon footprint, all those initiatives. We're all in this together. And I think the sooner we start to realize that and work on building that healthy relationship with one another, the quicker we'll get a solution.
Yep. So as we move into this new digital world, how has that changed your approach to reviewing applications? And I'm thinking in terms of your staffing model, has it made a difference?
I think it's made a difference. I think we've improved the relationship with the designer. in that we now share the drawings, we're working together, we're able to communicate through Zoom meetings or whatever format we want, to share documents, to review the drawings together collectively. And I'm pushing for more and more of that, rather than the traditional where you write a note, write an email, deficiency letter, whatever it is, and back and forth that way. If we can bring all the players to the table, whether it's, as I said, a Zoom meeting or whatever format we look at, and start to have that conversation and start to look for solutions together, I think that will accelerate the process. From an inspection side of things, a lot of the inspections are now being booked electronically. The inspectors are on site with a smartphone, so they're able to make their inspection notes and improve the communication between the constructor and the building inspector. And I think the turnaround time is much quicker, which I think leads to a better service and quicker decisions on the construction site.
And like in many other areas of the municipality, IT skills become more and more important.
Well, that's exactly it. And I look at the three-dimensional modeling and wonder, all those kids that are sitting on the couch playing all those video games, maybe that's the future building inspector and plans examiner. They're so familiar with the three-dimensional virtual world that they might excel at doing a plan review and a building inspection, as opposed to those that are accustomed to physically walking through buildings or looking at plans. So it's a really exciting time for the next generation of building inspectors, plans examiners, constructors. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Just wanted to leave, I know we're at our time limit. If there's any last words that you think are important to impart to our audience today.
Same as I said earlier, I think it's important to get involved, engage with the municipality sooner than later, talk about your short-term plans, your long-term plans, and the process will be much quicker. I go back to the example with the parking garage becoming a battery storage. Great example. If you know what's happening down the road, the further down the road you can plan for it, or sorry, the earlier you can plan for it, the quicker that transition will be.
Thanks. Arash?
I think the last thing I want to say is we've seen already that by waiting and seeing, not much is going to happen. We as an industry, if we come together, we have a strong voice. And there are issues that affect us all, and getting permits faster, streamlined development approvals is one of those examples where everybody agrees this needs to be done. So I think it's important to come together, and I just invite everybody who hears this webinar to, if they're interested in this space, get in touch with us, get in touch with One Ontario, and let's work together, because together, if we are one voice, then the government will have no choice to listen and get things done. So I think that's what it's going to take, not just with permitting, but with a lot of the other challenges that we have, that we are lacking digital infrastructure to move the industry forward. We need to keep our politicians in check. We need to make sure that we put the ask out there and we keep at it until things get done. And I think together as an industry, we have a strong voice and we should use that voice. So that's my last comment there.
Thanks very much for your participation and your insights. Very helpful.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for those last comments, the call to action. Thank you very much, Mary Ellen, Arash, and Ralph, for your session and your presentation of opinions.